October 31st, 2025. Kodiak bear kills 19-year-old college hiker in front of her friends. The morning mist clung to the towering spruce trees of Kodiak Island like ghostly fingers, creating an ethereal atmosphere that would soon transform into a nightmare beyond comprehension. Samantha Marie Larkin, 19 years old with auburn hair that caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the canopy, adjusted her navy blue hiking pack one final time before stepping onto the narrow trail that would lead her and her two closest friends into the heart of one of Alaska's most pristine and dangerous wilderness areas. The date was October 31st, 2025, Halloween. Though none of the three college students from the University of Alaska Anchorage could have imagined that this day would become far more terrifying than any horror movie they had ever watched together in their cramped dormitory room. Samantha had grown up in Fairbanks, Alaska, the daughter of Michael Larkin, a petroleum engineer who had spent 3 decades working the North Slope oil fields, and Rebecca Larkin, a high school biology teacher who had instilled in her daughter a profound love for the natural world. From the time she could walk, Samantha had been exploring the wilderness of interior Alaska with her parents, learning to identify animal tracks in fresh snow, understanding the subtle signs of changing weather patterns, and developing the kind of outdoor confidence that comes only from years of hands-on experience in some of the planet's most challenging environments. Her childhood was filled with camping trips to Denali National Park, fishing expeditions on the Chena River, and countless hours spent in her mother's classroom after school, studying specimen collections and learning about Alaska's complex ecosystem. She was studying environmental science at UAA with dreams of becoming a wildlife biologist, following in the footsteps of her academic idol, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had spent 40 years researching brown bear populations across Alaska and had published groundbreaking studies on predator-prey relationships in subarctic environments. Emily Catherine Ross, 20 years old, had been Samantha's roommate since their freshman year and represented almost everything opposite about her best friend's background and experience. Born and raised in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, Emily was the daughter of David Ross, a successful real estate developer, and Margaret Ross, a pediatric nurse who had always worried about her daughter's adventurous spirit. Emily's olive skin and dark brown hair, inherited from her Italian grandmother, seemed perpetually kissed by Arizona sunshine, but her true passion lay in photography and documenting the natural world through her camera lens. She had transferred to UAA specifically to study photojournalism with a focus on environmental issues, and her dorm room walls were covered with stunning black and white prints of desert landscapes, urban wildlife, and abstract compositions that revealed her artistic eye. Despite her lack of wilderness experience, Emily possessed an infectious enthusiasm for outdoor adventure and had spent the past year convincing her more cautious parents that Alaska was the perfect place to develop her skills as a nature photographer. She carried a professional-grade Canon EOS R5 camera system worth nearly $8,000, a gift from her parents who had finally relented to her persistent requests after she maintained a 3.8 GPA throughout her sophomore year. Brian Michael Carter, 21 years old, completed their trio as the unofficial leader and most experienced outdoorsman among the group, though his experience paled in comparison to what they would face on Kodiak Island. Born in Soldotna, Alaska, Brian was the son of Thomas Carter, a commercial fisherman who operated a salmon boat out of Cook Inlet, and Linda Carter, a nurse practitioner who ran a small clinic serving rural communities along the Kenai Peninsula. Brian's childhood had been spent on fishing boats, learning to read weather patterns, understanding tides and currents, and developing the kind of practical survival skills that came from growing up in a family where self-reliance was not just valued, but essential for survival. He was studying outdoor recreation management at UAA with plans to eventually start his own wilderness guiding business, and he had spent 2 summers working as an assistant guide for a company that led hiking and fishing expeditions throughout south-central Alaska. His rugged appearance, with sandy blonde hair bleached by sun and salt water, green eyes that seemed to constantly scan the environment for potential hazards, and hands calloused from years of handling fishing nets and outdoor equipment, made him appear older and more experienced than his 21 years suggested. The 3 friends had been planning this Halloween weekend trip to Kodiak Island for nearly 3 months, ever since Emily had discovered an article in National Geographic about the island's unique ecosystem and its population of Kodiak brown bears, the largest subspecies of brown bear in North America. The article had featured stunning photographs of these massive predators, some weighing over 1,500 pounds, fishing for salmon in crystal-clear streams, while bald eagles soared overhead against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains and endless wilderness. Emily had become obsessed with the idea of photographing these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat, and she had spent weeks researching the best locations, optimal times of year for photography, and safety protocols for bear encounters. Brian had initially been reluctant to commit to such an ambitious expedition, knowing that Kodiak Island's bear population was not only the largest in Alaska, but also among the most dangerous and unpredictable in North America, with documented cases of fatal attacks occurring regularly, despite extensive safety education and bear awareness programs. Samantha had been the deciding factor in convincing Brian to organize the trip. Using her extensive wilderness experience and her mother's connections in the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to obtain detailed maps, current bear activity reports, and recommendations for safe camping areas and hiking routes. She had spent hours studying topographical maps of Kodiak Island, identifying potential evacuation routes, water sources, and emergency communication points, and she had insisted that all 3 friends complete a comprehensive wilderness first aid course before making the journey. The course, taught by Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a former paramedic who now worked as an emergency medicine instructor at UAA, covered everything from treating hypothermia and altitude sickness to managing traumatic injuries and coordinating emergency evacuations in remote locations. Samantha had excelled in the course, demonstrating a natural aptitude for emergency medical procedures and earning praise from Dr. Martinez for her calm demeanor and quick decision-making under pressure. Their preparation had been meticulous, perhaps obsessively so, with Brian creating detailed equipment lists, meal plans, and emergency protocols that filled a 3-ring binder nearly 2 inches thick. Each friend carried identical emergency beacons, waterproof communication devices capable of sending distress signals to search and rescue authorities up to 200 miles away. Their backpacks contained bear spray, emergency shelters, first aid supplies, water purification equipment, and enough food for 5 days, even though they planned to return to Anchorage after 3 days of hiking and camping. Brian had insisted on purchasing a high-powered air horn and metal noisemakers designed specifically for deterring bear encounters, and Emily had researched and purchased a telephoto lens system that would allow her to photograph bears from distances exceeding 300 yards, theoretically maintaining a safe buffer zone while capturing the dramatic images she envisioned. The flight from Anchorage to Kodiak had taken place on October 29th, 2025, aboard a small charter aircraft operated by Northern Sky Aviation, a company that specialized in transporting outdoor enthusiasts to remote locations throughout Alaska. The pilot, Captain Robert Bob McKenzie, was a 54-year-old veteran aviator who had been flying in Alaska for over 30 years and had accumulated more than 20,000 hours of flight time in small aircraft operating under challenging conditions. Mackenzie had grown up in Kodiak and knew the island's geography, weather patterns and wildlife better than almost anyone in the aviation business. During the 90-minute flight, he had briefed the 3 college students on current conditions, pointing out recent bear activity areas, discussing optimal photography locations, and sharing stories from his decades of experience, transporting hunters, researchers, and photographers to various locations around the island. "You kids picked a great time to visit," Mackenzie had told them as they flew over the island's rugged coastline, dotted with countless bays, inlets, and streams where salmon runs attracted large concentrations of brown bears. "The salmon runs are starting to wind down, but there's still plenty of activity, especially in the inland streams. The bears are putting on their final weight before winter, so they're active but not as aggressive as they get during peak salmon season. Weather looks stable for the next few days, though you never know how quickly things can change out here." He had pointed out various landmarks visible from the air, including the specific trailhead where he would be dropping them off, and the designated pickup location where he would return to collect them on November 2nd, 2025, at precisely 2 p.m. The trailhead, located approximately 15 miles northeast of Kodiak's main settlement, sat at the confluence of 2 major watersheds and provided access to a network of established hiking trails that ranged from easy-day hikes suitable for families to challenging multi-day expeditions that tested even experienced wilderness travelers. The area, known locally as Bear Valley, had been carefully managed by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game for over 2 decades, with designated camping areas, bear-resistant food storage containers, and emergency communication stations positioned at strategic intervals along the main trails. Despite these safety measures, the area averaged 3 to 4 bear encounters per year that required intervention by wildlife authorities. And there had been 2 fatalities in the past decade, both involving experienced outdoors people who had made critical errors in judgment during close encounters with protective sows and their cubs. Brian had selected their hiking route after consulting with Dr. Patricia Williams, a wildlife biologist who had studied Kodiak brown bears for 15 years and maintained detailed records of bear movements, feeding patterns, and territorial boundaries throughout the island. Dr. Williams, who operated a research station approximately 20 miles from their intended hiking area, had recommended a specific loop trail that would provide excellent wildlife viewing opportunities while minimizing the risk of dangerous encounters. The route, designated as the Northwest Ridge Trail, was a moderate 15-mile loop that could be completed comfortably in 2 days, with an established campsite at the halfway point that featured bear-resistant storage facilities, a cleared cooking area positioned downwind from sleeping areas, and emergency communication equipment maintained by the Alaska State Park System. The weather forecast for their 3-day expedition called for partly cloudy skies, daytime temperatures ranging from 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and nighttime lows in the mid-30s, conditions that Brian considered ideal for hiking and photography. The extended forecast showed a low-pressure system approaching from the Gulf of Alaska that could bring rain and possibly snow to higher elevations, but it was not expected to impact their area until after their scheduled departure. Wind conditions were predicted to be light and variable, which would help minimize the scent dispersion that could inadvertently attract bears to their camping area. After spending their first night in a budget motel in Kodiak town, the 3 friends had awakened before dawn on October 30th, 2025, consumed a hearty breakfast at a local diner frequented by commercial fishermen and hunting guides, and spent final hours checking and rechecking their equipment while reviewing emergency procedures and communication protocols. They had registered their hiking plan with local authorities, providing detailed information about their intended route, camping locations, emergency contact information, and expected return time. The registration process included a mandatory safety briefing conducted by Ranger Steve Kowalski, a 28-year veteran of the Alaska State Park System, who had personally been involved in dozens of bear-related incidents and rescue operations throughout his career. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you could save your lives. Ranger Kowalski had begun his briefing, standing before a wall covered with photographs and maps documenting bear encounters, safety protocols, and emergency procedures. Kodiak brown bears are not like the black bears you might encounter in the lower 48 states. These animals can weigh over 1,500 pounds, run faster than a horse, and climb trees better than most people can walk. They have no natural predators, except humans, and they've learned to associate human presence with food sources, which makes them potentially more dangerous than bears in more remote areas. He had spent 45 minutes reviewing proper food storage procedures, explaining the importance of maintaining clean campsites, demonstrating proper use of bear spray, and walking through step-by-step procedures for various types of bear encounters. Remember, he had concluded, making eye contact with each of the three friends, if you encounter a bear, your response depends entirely on the bear's behavior and the circumstances of the encounter. If the bear appears to be foraging or traveling and hasn't noticed you, back away slowly and quietly. If the bear has noticed you but appears calm, avoid direct eye contact. Speak in a calm, low voice and back away slowly while keeping the bear in sight. If the bear appears agitated, stands on its hind legs, or makes huffing sounds, prepare your bear spray but do not use it unless the bear moves toward you. And if a bear charges, do not run unless you are absolutely certain you can reach a secure location, because a running human triggers a chase response in most predators. Captain Mackenzie had transported them to the trailhead via helicopter on the morning of October 30th, landing in a small clearing that had been established specifically for aircraft access to the trail system. The flight had taken only 20 minutes, but it provided spectacular aerial views of the island's diverse terrain, from coastal areas where seals and sea otters played in kelp forests to inland valleys where caribou grazed in alpine meadows surrounded by peaks that rose over 4,000 feet above sea level. Emily had shot nearly 200 photographs during the brief flight, capturing images of bears visible from the air, pristine watersheds unmarked by human development, and sweeping vistas that showcase the raw beauty of one of North America's last truly wild places. Their first day of hiking had proceeded exactly according to plan, with the three friends making steady progress along well-maintained trails that wound through old-growth forests of Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and Alaska cedar trees, some of which were over 300 years old and measured more than 6 feet in diameter. The understory consisted primarily of devil's club, elderberry, and various species of ferns and mosses that created a lush, almost tropical appearance despite the northern latitude. Stream crossings were frequent but manageable, with sturdy log bridges or established ford locations that allowed them to keep their feet dry while maintaining good progress toward their planned campsite. Wildlife sightings during their first day had been abundant but non-threatening, including several bald eagles, a family of river otters playing in a beaver pond, numerous species of songbirds, and fresh signs of bear activity including tracks, scat, and claw marks on trees, but no actual bear sightings. Emily had been delighted with the photographic opportunities, shooting hundreds of images with her telephoto lens system and expressing amazement at the pristine quality of light filtering through the forest canopy. Brian had maintained a steady pace and demonstrated excellent trail navigation skills, using his GPS unit and topographical maps to confirm their location at regular intervals and ensuring they stayed on designated trails. Samantha had served as the group's naturalist, identifying plant and animal species, explaining ecological relationships, and sharing her extensive knowledge of Alaska's wilderness ecosystems, gained from years of field experience with her mother and academic studies at UAA. She had been particularly excited to observe several species of plants and animals that were unique to Kodiak Island, including the Kodiak bear clover, a plant species found nowhere else in the world. and signs of the island's endemic Kodiak fox, a subspecies that had evolved in isolation for thousands of years. Their first night's campsite, located at Bear Creek Overlook, approximately 8 miles from the trailhead, had been picture perfect, situated on a small bluff overlooking a pristine stream where salmon were still running despite the late season. They had followed all prescribed safety procedures, storing their food in bear-resistant containers positioned 100 yards downwind from their sleeping area, cooking and eating in a designated area another 50 yards from their tents, and properly disposing of all waste according to leave-no-trace principles. The evening had been spent around a small campfire, sharing stories, planning the next day's activities, and reviewing Emily's photographs on her camera's LCD screen. "This is absolutely incredible," Emily had said while scrolling through the day's images, her face illuminated by the camera's backlight in the gathering darkness. "I've never seen landscape photography opportunities like this. The light, the colors, the pristine conditions. It's like stepping back in time to see North America the way it looked before European settlement." She had been particularly excited about a series of images capturing bald eagles fishing in the stream below their campsite, and she had spent considerable time adjusting camera settings and planning shots for the following day. Brian had used his satellite communication device to send a brief message to the emergency contact system, confirming their safe arrival at the first campsite, reporting no problems or concerns, and confirming their intention to continue with the planned itinerary. The message, automatically forwarded to Ranger Kowalski and other appropriate authorities, provided GPS coordinates, weather observations, and basic status information that would be invaluable if any emergency situation developed. Samantha had spent time before sleep reviewing her field notebook, recording observations about wildlife signs, plant species, and ecological conditions that she planned to incorporate into a research project for Dr. Chen's advanced wildlife biology course. She had been particularly intrigued by evidence of territorial marking behavior among bears, including claw marks on trees at various heights that suggested the presence of both adult males and females in the immediate area. "The territorial dynamics here are fascinating," she had written in her notebook. "The density of marking behavior suggests this drainage supports a higher bear population than typical for this habitat type, probably due to the consistent salmon runs and abundant berry production I observed today." October 31st, 2025, dawned clear and cold, with temperatures in the upper 30s and a thin layer of frost covering their tents and equipment. The three friends had awakened before sunrise, following their planned schedule that would allow them to break camp early and reach their second planned campsite by early afternoon, leaving plenty of time for photography and wildlife observation during optimal lighting conditions. Brian had prepared a hot breakfast of oatmeal, dried fruit and coffee using their lightweight camping stove, while Emily and Samantha packed their sleeping gear and prepared their day packs for the day's 8-mile hike. The morning routine had been relaxed and efficient, with each friend having developed specific responsibilities that ensured camp chores were completed quickly and thoroughly. Samantha had been responsible for water treatment and filtration, using their portable water purification system to process stream water for drinking and cooking. Emily had handled food preparation and cleanup, carefully managing their limited supplies while ensuring all waste was properly disposed of according to bear safety protocols. Brian had been responsible for navigation, equipment maintenance, and communication, using his GPS unit to plot their route and identify potential hazards or points of interest along the trail. The second day's hike had begun at approximately 7:30 a.m., with the three friends following a well-marked trail that gradually descended from their overnight campsite toward a major salmon stream known locally as Grizzly Creek, where Dr. Williams had predicted they would have excellent opportunities to observe and photograph bears engaged in fishing behavior. The trail conditions were excellent, with firm footing, minimal mud, and clear sight lines that would provide advance warning of any wildlife encounters. Their hiking pace had been deliberately slow, allowing time for frequent photography stops, wildlife observation, and rest breaks that kept them fresh and alert for potential bear encounters. Emily had been shooting continuously, capturing images of morning light filtering through the forest, frost-covered spider webs strung between branches, and abstract compositions created by fallen logs and reflected light in small pools along the trail. Her enthusiasm for the photographic opportunities had been infectious, and even Brian, who typically focused more on practical hiking considerations than artistic pursuits, had found himself stopping frequently to point out potential subjects or suggest compositions. "The light quality here is absolutely magical," Emily had commented during one of their rest stops, approximately 3 miles into the day's hike. "I've shot in desert environments, mountain landscapes, urban settings, all kinds of different conditions, but I've never experienced light like this. It's like the atmosphere itself is somehow different, cleaner, more transparent." She had been experimenting with various lens configurations, switching between her 24 to 70 mm standard zoom for landscape compositions, and her 100 to 400 mm telephoto for wildlife shots, and she had been particularly excited about the performance of her new 800 mm super telephoto lens that allowed her to capture frame-filling images of distant subjects without disturbing their natural behavior. Samantha had been serving as their wildlife expert, using her extensive knowledge of animal behavior to interpret signs they encountered along the trail and predict likely locations for bear sightings. She had been particularly intrigued by a series of bear trails that paralleled the main hiking trail, noting that the animals appeared to be using established routes that suggested regular travel patterns between feeding areas and daybeds. "These trails show consistent use over multiple seasons," she had explained while examining a well-worn path through dense vegetation. "Bears are creatures of habit, especially during salmon season, and they tend to use the same routes year after year unless something forces them to change their patterns." The terrain through which they traveled was spectacular and diverse, ranging from dense forests of massive trees to open meadows carpeted with late-season wildflowers, from steep-sided ravines where streams cascaded over bedrock ledges to gentle valleys where beaver dams had created extensive wetland habitats. Each ecosystem supported different wildlife species and provided unique photographic opportunities that had kept Emily busy with her camera, while Samantha identified and recorded various plant and animal species in her field notebook. By mid-morning, approximately 10:45 a.m., they had reached a major trail junction where their planned route intersected with several other established trails leading to different areas of the island. Brian had called for an extended rest stop at this location, both to confirm their navigation and to allow Emily time to photograph a spectacular vista that opened toward the island's interior mountains. The junction featured a large information board maintained by the Alaska State Park System, providing current information about trail conditions, recent wildlife activity, bear safety reminders, and emergency contact procedures. According to this, there was a bear encounter reported in this area just 4 days ago, Brian had noted while reading the information board. A sow with 2 cubs was observed fishing in the stream about half a mile downstream from here. The report says the bears appeared to be non-aggressive and moved away when hikers made noise, but it's definitely something we need to keep in mind. He had used his GPS unit to mark the location mentioned in the report and had adjusted their planned route slightly to minimize the possibility of surprising bears in areas where previous encounters had occurred. Emily had been thrilled by the news of recent bear activity, viewing it as confirmation that their wildlife photography objectives were realistic and achievable. "This is exactly what I was hoping for," she had said, while adjusting her camera settings for optimal wildlife photography. Fresh bear activity in an area where we can observe and photograph them safely. This could be the chance of a lifetime to get some truly spectacular images. She had spent considerable time reviewing her equipment, checking battery levels, confirming memory card capacity, and practicing rapid lens changes that might be necessary if they encountered bears engaged in different types of behavior, requiring different photographic approaches. Samantha had been more cautious in her response to the bear activity report, using her wildlife biology training to analyze the potential implications and risks associated with bears in the area. "A sow with cubs changes everything," she had pointed out while studying the topographical map to identify potential escape routes and safe areas. "Female bears with young cubs are the most dangerous and unpredictable bears you can encounter. They're extremely protective. They can't climb trees to escape perceived threats like solitary bears can, and they're more likely to respond aggressively to any situation they interpret as threatening their cubs." She had insisted that they review their emergency procedures and confirm that all three friends knew exactly how to use their bear spray and emergency communication equipment. The discussion about bear safety had led to a comprehensive review of their emergency protocols, with Brian quizzing Samantha and Emily about proper responses to various types of bear encounters, testing their knowledge of bear spray deployment procedures and reviewing the steps for activating their emergency beacons if a serious incident occurred. The review had taken nearly 30 minutes, but all three friends agreed it was time well spent, given the confirmed presence of potentially dangerous wildlife in their immediate vicinity. "Remember," Brian had emphasized while demonstrating proper bear spray technique, "if we encounter a sow with cubs, our primary objective is to give them as much space as possible and allow them to move away without feeling threatened. Do not attempt to photograph cubs unless you can do so from an extreme distance. Do not make sudden movements or loud noises that might be interpreted as threatening, and be prepared to use bear spray if the sow approaches within 30 feet of our position." He had positioned himself as the designated bear spray operator, carrying the canister in a readily accessible position on his chest harness, while Samantha and Emily carried backup canisters in their pack hip belts. The trail beyond the junction had descended gradually toward Grizzly Creek through increasingly dense forest, with the understory becoming thicker and sightlines becoming shorter as they approached the major salmon stream where bear activity was most likely to occur. The sound of running water had grown progressively louder, indicating they were approaching the creek, and all three friends had instinctively become more alert and cautious as they entered prime bear habitat. "Listen," Samantha had whispered at approximately 11:30 a.m., holding up her hand to signal the group to stop and remain quiet. "Do you hear that splashing sound? That's not just stream flow. That sounds like something large moving in the water." They had stood motionless for several minutes, listening intently to sounds coming from the direction of the creek, approximately 200 yards ahead of their position. The splashing sounds had continued intermittently, accompanied by what sounded like heavy breathing or huffing, clear indicators of large wildlife activity near the water. Brian had signaled for the group to move forward very slowly and quietly, following established procedures for approaching areas where bears might be present. They had advanced approximately 50 yards along the trail when Emily had suddenly grabbed Samantha's arm and pointed toward a thick stand of elderberry bushes approximately 100 yards to their left. "There," she had whispered almost inaudibly. "Do you see movement in those bushes? Something large is moving through there, and it's moving in our direction." The three friends had frozen in place, watching the vegetation carefully for signs of wildlife while listening intently for additional sounds that might help identify what they were observing. After what seemed like several minutes, but was probably less than 30 seconds, a massive brown shape had become visible through the brush, moving slowly but steadily in a direction that would intersect their trail approximately 50 yards ahead of their current position. The animal appeared to be following a well-used bear trail that paralleled the main hiking trail, and its behavior suggested it was unaware of human presence in the area. "That's a big bear," Brian had whispered while slowly reaching for his bear spray and ensuring the safety clip was removed and the canister was ready for immediate use. "From the size and the way it's moving, I'd guess it's an adult male, probably weighing over 800 pounds. It doesn't seem to have noticed us yet, so we need to decide whether to back away quietly or try to make noise and announce our presence." The bear had continued moving through the vegetation, occasionally becoming completely invisible as it passed behind dense cover, but continuing on a course that would eventually bring it into visual contact with the hiking trail. Emily had instinctively raised her camera and begun shooting with her telephoto lens, capturing images of the bear as it moved through the natural habitat while maintaining what she believed to be a safe distance. The bear's coat was a rich chocolate brown, with silver-tipped guard hairs that caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the forest canopy, and its massive size was evident even at a distance as it pushed through vegetation that would have been impenetrable to the three humans. Through her telephoto lens, she could see the bear's powerful muscles rippling beneath its thick coat, and she was amazed by the animal's grace and stealth despite its enormous size. "Emily, stop shooting and get ready to move," Samantha had urgently whispered, while carefully studying the bear's behavior and trying to determine its likely intentions. "That bear is definitely coming this way, and we need to decide right now whether we're going to retreat back up the trail or try to move off the trail and let it pass." She had been torn between her desire to observe the magnificent predator and her training in wildlife safety that emphasized the importance of maintaining safe distances and avoiding situations where bears might feel cornered or threatened. The decision had been made for them when the bear had suddenly stopped moving and raised its massive head, clearly having detected some indication of human presence in the area. For several long seconds, the bear had remained motionless, testing the air currents and using its exceptional sense of smell to identify the source of the unfamiliar scents it had detected. Then, in a movement that demonstrated the incredible speed and agility that made brown bears such formidable predators, the animal had stood upright on its hind legs, rising to a height that exceeded 8 feet, and had begun scanning the area visually while continuing to sample air currents for scent information. "It knows we're here," Brian had stated matter-of-factly while ensuring his bear spray was properly positioned and ready for immediate deployment. "Now we need to let it know we're humans, not a threat, and that we're going to give it plenty of space to do whatever it wants to do." He had begun speaking in a calm, steady voice, saying, "Hey bear, we see you there. We're not a threat. We're just going to back away slowly and give you all the space you need." His words had carried clearly through the forest, and the bear had immediately focused its attention in their direction, dropping back to all 4 legs and beginning to move directly toward their position. "Oh God, it's coming toward us," Emily had whispered, while continuing to photograph the approaching bear, despite the obvious danger of their situation. Through her telephoto lens, she could see the bear's facial expression and body language clearly, and she was struck by how intelligent and alert the bear was. Animal appeared as it approached their position with obvious curiosity rather than aggression. The bear's ears were forward, indicating interest rather than defensive behavior, and its mouth was closed rather than open in a threatening display, suggesting it was investigating rather than preparing to attack. Samantha had been carefully observing the bear's behavior, using her wildlife biology training to assess the animal's intentions and emotional state. "Its body language doesn't suggest aggression," she had whispered to her friends while slowly backing away from their original position. It's curious about us, but it's not showing defensive or predatory behavior. If we back away slowly and continue talking calmly, it might just investigate our scent and then continue on its original path. She had been encouraged by the bear's relaxed gait and non-aggressive posture, but she remained alert for any changes in behavior that might indicate increasing stress or agitation. The bear had continued approaching their position, closing the distance to approximately 75 yards before stopping again and resuming its careful scent analysis of the area. At this closer distance, the three friends could fully appreciate the animal's magnificent size and power, with massive shoulder muscles, paws larger than dinner plates, and claws over 3 inches long that were clearly visible as the bear moved across fallen logs and rocky terrain. The bear's coat appeared to be in perfect condition for the approaching winter, thick and lustrous, with the heavy fat deposits that would sustain it through months of hibernation. "This is incredible," Emily had whispered while continuing to shoot photographs with her telephoto lens. "I've never been this close to a wild bear before. Look at the detail in its coat, the expression in its eyes, the way it moves with such grace despite its size. These are going to be once-in-a-lifetime images." She had been shooting continuously, capturing the bear's approach from multiple angles and with various lens settings that would provide different perspectives on the encounter. Brian had maintained his position as the group's primary safety officer, keeping his bear spray ready while monitoring the bear's behavior for any signs of increasing aggression or agitation. "I think it's just curious about us," he had observed while slowly backing away from their original position. "As long as we don't do anything sudden or threatening, and as long as we keep giving it space, I think it's going to investigate and then continue on its way." He had been encouraged by the bear's consistent behavior patterns and the lack of any defensive or predatory indicators in its body language. The encounter had continued for approximately 10 minutes, with the bear gradually approaching to within about 50 yards of their position, before apparently satisfying its curiosity and beginning to move away from the trail toward the creek where salmon were still running. The three friends had maintained their calm, non-threatening behavior throughout the encounter, speaking in quiet voices, moving slowly and predictably, and avoiding direct eye contact with the bear, while keeping it in sight at all times. As the bear had moved away from them, they had continued backing up the trail to maintain safe distance, while Emily continued photographing the magnificent animal until it disappeared into dense vegetation near the creek. "That was absolutely incredible," Emily had exclaimed, once the bear was completely out of sight and they had moved several hundred yards back up the trail to a safe distance. "I can't believe we just had a peaceful encounter with a wild Kodiak brown bear. Those photographs are going to be amazing. I got shots of it standing upright, walking through the forest, investigating our scent, everything. This is exactly what I was hoping would happen on this trip." She had been reviewing images on her camera's LCD screen, scrolling through dozens of shots that captured different aspects of their bear encounter. Samantha had been equally thrilled by the encounter, viewing it as confirmation of everything she had learned about bear behavior in her wildlife biology courses and from her extensive reading about predator ecology. That bear demonstrated perfect natural behavior, she had observed, while making detailed notes in her field journal about the encounter. It detected our presence, investigated to determine whether we represented a threat or opportunity, concluded we were neither, and continued with its normal activities. That's exactly how these encounters should go when humans follow proper protocols, and bears are behaving naturally without food conditioning or other artificial influences. Brian had been relieved that their first major bear encounter had proceeded so smoothly, but he had also used the experience to reinforce important safety lessons and ensure his friends understood that not all bear encounters would be so benign. "We handled that perfectly," he had told them while securing his bear spray and checking their position on his GPS unit. We stayed calm, we followed proper procedures, we gave the bear plenty of space, and we let it make its own decisions about how to respond to our presence. But remember, that was probably a mature male that was focused on feeding and wasn't protecting cubs or defending territory. A sow with cubs or a bear that's been surprised or cornered might react very differently. The successful bear encounter had energized all three friends and reinforced their confidence in their safety procedures and wilderness skills. But it had also highlighted the reality that they were traveling through habitat where large predators were common and encounters were likely to occur. They had spent considerable time discussing the encounter, analyzing the bear's behavior, reviewing their own responses, and identifying lessons learned that would help them handle future wildlife encounters more effectively. By early afternoon, approximately 1:15 p.m., they had resumed their planned route and were approaching the area where their trail would cross Grizzly Creek at a shallow ford that provided access to their planned camping area on the opposite side of the stream. The creek crossing had been identified in their pre-trip planning as a potential hazard area where bear encounters were especially likely, since salmon runs concentrated both fish and bears in relatively small areas with limited escape routes for humans who might inadvertently surprise feeding bears. According to our map, the ford should be just around that bend, Brian had announced while consulting his GPS unit and comparing their position to the topographical features visible around them. Once we cross the creek, it's only about 2 miles to our planned camping area, so we'll have plenty of time to set up camp, prepare dinner, and enjoy the evening light for photography. He had been pleased with their progress and timing, which had proceeded almost exactly according to their detailed itinerary, despite the extended bear encounter that had added nearly an hour to their travel time. As they had approached the creek crossing, the sound of running water had grown progressively louder, and they had begun to smell the distinctive odors associated with salmon runs, including the scent of spawning fish and the organic decay that occurred when large numbers of fish completed their life cycles in concentrated areas. These scents, while natural and expected in salmon habitat, also served as attractants for bears and other scavengers, making creek crossings during salmon season particularly hazardous for human travelers. "Listen carefully," Samantha had instructed her friends as they approached the creek. "Before we commit to crossing, we need to spend at least 5 minutes listening and watching for signs of bear activity near the water. Salmon streams during spawning season are like dinner bells for bears, and we definitely don't want to surprise one that's feeding or resting near the crossing." She had insisted that they stop approximately 100 yards from the creek and carefully observe the area before proceeding, using their binoculars to scan for wildlife and listening intently for sounds that might indicate bear presence. The creek crossing area had appeared quiet and free of wildlife when they had finally approached the water, but the abundance of fresh bear sign, including tracks in the muddy banks, scat deposits and claw marks on trees near the water, had clearly indicated that the area was regularly used by multiple bears for fishing and travel. The ford itself consisted of a shallow riffle where the creek was approximately 30 feet wide and knee-deep, with a rocky bottom that would provide secure footing for humans while also creating the turbulent water conditions preferred by spawning salmon. "Look at all these salmon," Emily had exclaimed, while setting up her telephoto lens to photograph the fish swimming in the clear water. "There must be hundreds of them, maybe thousands. No wonder this area attracts so many bears. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet." She had been amazed by the density of salmon in the creek, with fish visible from bank to bank in some pools, and she had spent considerable time photographing the natural phenomenon while her friends prepared for the creek crossing. Brian had waded into the creek first, testing the depth and current while confirming that the crossing was safe and manageable for all three friends carrying their full packs. The water had been cold, but not dangerously so, reaching just above his knees at the deepest point, and the current had been moderate and predictable without dangerous hydraulics or hidden obstacles that might cause problems for inexperienced waders. "It's perfect," he had called back to his friends while reaching the opposite bank. "Take your time, watch your footing on the rocks, but it's really straightforward." Emily had crossed second, carrying her expensive camera equipment in waterproof cases and taking extra care to maintain secure footing while protecting her photographic gear from potential water damage. She had been nervous about the crossing, knowing that a fall into the creek could destroy thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment, but the ford had proven to be exactly as manageable as Brian had indicated. "That wasn't bad at all," she had said, while reaching the opposite bank and immediately checking her camera cases for any signs of water intrusion. Samantha had been the last to cross, and as she had waded into the creek, she had noticed movement in the forest on the bank they had just left behind. "Brian, Emily, look back across the creek," she had called quietly while continuing her crossing. "There's something moving in the trees where we just came from." She had completed her crossing quickly but carefully while keeping an eye on the movement she had detected on the opposite bank. The three friends had watched from their new position as another bear, smaller than the one they had encountered earlier but still impressively large, had emerged from the forest and approached the creek bank where they had been standing just minutes earlier. This bear had appeared to be following their scent trail, and it had spent considerable time investigating the exact locations where they had prepared for their creek crossing. The animal's behavior had been methodical and thorough, clearly indicating that it was familiar with human scent and possibly accustomed to following human trails to look for food opportunities. "That's a different bear from the one we saw this morning," Samantha had observed while watching the animal through her binoculars. "This one is smaller, probably a subadult, maybe 4 or 5 years old. It's definitely following our scent trail, which suggests it's had some experience with humans before. That could be good or bad, depending on whether its previous human encounters involved food rewards." She had been concerned by the bear's obvious interest in their scent trail and its systematic investigation of their former position. "Should we be worried about that?" Emily had asked, while instinctively checking her camera settings for potential wildlife photography opportunities. Even though they had just completed a successful bear encounter earlier in the day, she remained excited about the possibility of photographing additional bears in their natural habitat, and this second bear appeared to be exhibiting interesting tracking behavior that could provide unique photographic opportunities. Brian had been more cautious in his assessment of the second bear encounter, recognizing that an animal actively following human scent trails represented a potentially more dangerous situation than their earlier encounter with a bear that had simply been curious about human presence. "I don't like the fact that it's following our trail," he had admitted while preparing his bear spray for potential use. "A bear that's actively tracking humans is more likely to approach our camping area, and that could create problems tonight when we're sleeping and less able to respond quickly to a close encounter." The second bear had spent approximately 15 minutes investigating the creek bank area where the three friends had prepared for their crossing, and it had then waded into the creek and begun what appeared to be fishing behavior, largely ignoring the humans watching from the opposite bank. The bear's fishing technique had been spectacular to observe, demonstrating the incredible speed and coordination that allowed these massive predators to catch salmon swimming in fast-moving water. Within minutes, the bear had successfully caught 3 salmon, consuming them immediately and continuing to hunt for additional fish. "This is incredible photography," Emily had whispered while shooting continuously with her telephoto lens. "I'm getting shots of natural fishing behavior from a perfect angle with great light and no obstructions. This is exactly the kind of wildlife photography I came to Alaska to capture." She had been shooting at high frame rates, capturing multiple images per second to document the bear's fishing technique and the spectacular action sequences that occurred when the bear made successful catches. "We should probably continue toward our camping area," Brian had suggested after they had observed the fishing bear for nearly 30 minutes. "It's getting later in the day, and we still need to set up camp, secure our food, and prepare dinner before dark. Plus, if that bear is actively following human scent trails, I'd prefer to be settled in our campsite with all our safety procedures in place before it decides to investigate our location any further." He had been impressed by the bear's fishing skills, but remained concerned about the implications of its apparent interest in human activity. The final 2 miles of hiking to their planned camping area had proceeded without incident, following a well-maintained trail that paralleled Grizzly Creek through spectacular scenery that provided numerous opportunities for landscape photography. The late afternoon light had been extraordinary, with golden sunshine streaming through the forest canopy and creating dramatic contrasts between light and shadow that highlighted the pristine beauty of the wilderness environment. Emily had stopped frequently to capture images of the changing light conditions, while Samantha had continued recording observations about wildlife signs and ecological relationships in her field journal. Their designated camping area, Bear Creek Confluence, had been located at the junction of Grizzly Creek and a smaller tributary stream, providing access to excellent fishing locations while offering elevated terrain that would allow them to observe approaching wildlife from a safe distance. The campsite had featured all the amenities they had hoped for, including bear-resistant food storage containers, a designated cooking area positioned downwind from sleeping areas, and an emergency communication station that would allow them to contact authorities if any serious problems developed. "This is absolutely perfect," Brian had announced while surveying the campsite and planning their setup procedures. Great sight lines in all directions, elevated position above the creek, established bear safety infrastructure, and easy access to water for cooking and cleaning. We couldn't ask for a better location. He had immediately begun implementing their established camping procedures, positioning their tents in optimal locations and identifying emergency evacuation routes that would be available if bear problems developed during the night. Emily had been equally enthusiastic about the camping location, recognizing that the elevated position would provide excellent opportunities for photographing bears that might approach the creek confluence during evening feeding periods. "I can set up my telephoto lens on a tripod right over there." She had pointed to a flat rock outcropping that commanded a view of both streams. "If any bears come to fish this evening, I'll have perfect shooting positions with great light and multiple compositional options." She had begun planning her photography setup while helping with camp establishment tasks. Samantha had appreciated the camping location from an ecological perspective, noting that the stream confluence created ideal habitat conditions for a wide variety of wildlife species and represented exactly the type of location where she would expect to observe complex predator-prey relationships and territorial interactions among different bear individuals. "This confluence creates a natural funnel for salmon migration," she had explained while examining the water flow patterns. "Bears know that fish concentrate in areas like this, so we're likely to see multiple individuals using this area during evening and early morning feeding periods." The process of establishing their camp had proceeded efficiently, with each friend taking responsibility for specific tasks that ensured their safety procedures were implemented properly while maximizing their comfort and convenience during their final night in the wilderness. Brian had positioned their tents for optimal safety and weather protection. Emily had organized their photographic equipment and planned her evening shooting strategy, and Samantha had prepared their dinner while maintaining careful attention to bear safety protocols that would minimize the risk of attracting unwanted wildlife visitors during the night. By early evening, approximately 6:30 p.m., their camp had been fully established and they were enjoying a hot dinner of dehydrated beef stew, instant mashed potatoes, and hot chocolate while watching the spectacular sunset that was developing over the surrounding mountains. The weather remained perfect for their purposes, with calm winds, clear skies, and temperatures in the mid-40s that were ideal for both human comfort and wildlife activity. All three friends had been in excellent spirits, thrilled by their successful bear encounters, spectacular photography opportunities, and flawless execution of their wilderness expedition. "This has been everything I hoped it would be and more," Emily had said while reviewing the day's photographs on her camera's LCD screen. The bear encounters, the fishing behavior, the pristine wilderness, the perfect light conditions. It's been like a nature documentary come to life. I can't wait to process these images and share them with my photography professors back at UAA. She had shot over 800 photographs during their 2 days of hiking, documenting everything from macro shots of wildflowers to spectacular landscape vistas to intimate portraits of wildlife behavior. "I'm getting amazing data for my research project," Samantha had added, while updating her field notes with detailed observations about bear behavior, territorial marking, and ecological relationships she had observed throughout their expedition. "Dr. Chen is going to be thrilled with the quality of behavioral observations I've been able to document. This kind of field experience is invaluable for understanding predator ecology in subarctic environments." She had filled nearly 30 pages of her field notebook with detailed observations that would contribute significantly to her academic work. Brian had been satisfied with their expedition's safety record and successful completion of their planned objectives, but he had also remained vigilant about potential bear activity in their camping area during the evening and overnight periods when wildlife movement typically increased. "We've done everything right so far," he had acknowledged while conducting a final check of their bear safety preparations. "Our food is properly stored, our campsite is clean and organized, and we have all our emergency equipment ready if we need it. But remember, this is prime time for bear activity, so we need to stay alert and follow all our safety protocols throughout the evening." As darkness had approached, the three friends had implemented their established evening safety routine, ensuring all scented items were properly stored in bear-resistant containers, securing their cooking area and eating utensils, and preparing their emergency equipment for immediate access if wildlife encounters occurred during the night. They had positioned their bear spray canisters within easy reach of their sleeping areas, confirmed that their emergency communication devices were fully charged and operational, and reviewed their evacuation procedures one final time before settling into their tents for what they expected to be their final night in the wilderness. The evening had passed quietly, with no signs of bear activity in their immediate camping area, despite the obvious evidence that multiple bears used the stream confluence regularly for fishing and travel. All three friends had slept soundly, awakened by the sounds of bird activity at dawn, and had begun their morning routine with confidence that their final day would proceed as smoothly as the previous 2 days had gone. October 31st, 2025, their final day in the wilderness, had dawned clear and cold with perfect conditions for their planned 8-mile hike back to the pickup location where Captain Mackenzie would meet them at 2 p.m. for their return flight to Anchorage. The morning routine had proceeded exactly according to their established schedule, with hot breakfast, efficient camp breakdown, and final equipment checks completed by 8 a.m. All three friends had been in excellent spirits, energized by their successful expedition, and excited about returning to civilization with spectacular photographs, valuable research data, and memories of an absolutely perfect wilderness experience. The final day's hiking route would take them along a different trail system that would provide new scenery and additional opportunities for wildlife observation while avoiding areas where they had previously encountered bears. "I can't believe how perfectly everything has gone," Emily had commented while shouldering her pack for the final day of hiking. "Perfect weather, incredible wildlife encounters, amazing photography opportunities, no equipment problems, no safety issues. It's been like a textbook wilderness expedition." She had been particularly excited about processing her photographs and sharing them with her family, friends, and photography instructors back at UAA. "It really has been incredible," Samantha had agreed while taking a final look around their campsite to ensure they were leaving no trace of their presence. "The ecosystem here is so pristine, so complex, so perfectly balanced. It's given me a whole new appreciation for the importance of wilderness preservation and wildlife management. This is the kind of place that needs to be protected forever." She had been taking mental notes about conservation issues and management challenges that she planned to incorporate into her academic work. Brian had been conducting final safety checks and navigation planning for their return hike, confirming their route on his GPS unit and identifying potential hazards or points of interest along the trail. "The weather forecast looks good for the entire day. Our pickup is confirmed for 2 p.m. and we have an easy 8-mile hike with plenty of time for stops and photography. Everything is set up perfectly for a great final day." He had been satisfied with their safety record and successful completion of all their expedition objectives. The return trail had initially led them away from Grizzly Creek through dense forest that provided different scenery and wildlife viewing opportunities than they had experienced during their inbound journey. The forest had been alive with bird activity, including several species of woodpeckers, numerous songbirds, and occasional sightings of ravens and bald eagles soaring overhead. The understory vegetation had been particularly beautiful in the morning light, with dewdrops highlighting spider webs and frost crystals creating delicate patterns on leaves and ferns that provided excellent opportunities for macro photography. "The forest ecology here is fascinating," Samantha had observed, while identifying various plant species and explaining their ecological relationships to her friends. "You can see how different species have adapted to the specific soil conditions, moisture levels, and light availability created by the old-growth canopy. This is probably a several hundred-year-old forest community that's reached a stable climax condition." She had been particularly interested in the epiphytic moss and lichen communities that grew on the massive tree trunks, representing species that were found only in the most pristine old-growth forest environments. Emily had been shooting continuously, capturing the morning light filtering through the forest canopy and creating the kind of dramatic lighting conditions that were perfect for artistic nature photography. "The light quality is absolutely incredible this morning," she had commented while adjusting her camera settings for optimal image quality. "I'm getting shots that look like they belong in National Geographic or Outdoor Photography magazine. This forest is like a natural photography studio with perfect lighting and endless compositional possibilities." She had been experimenting with various photographic techniques, including focus stacking for macro images and exposure bracketing for high dynamic range landscape shots. By mid-morning, approximately 10:30 a.m., they had covered nearly half the distance to their pickup location and were making excellent progress along the well-maintained trail. Their pace had been relaxed and comfortable, allowing time for frequent stops to observe wildlife, capture photographs, and simply enjoy their final hours in one of Alaska's most spectacular wilderness areas. All three friends had been feeling confident and relaxed, anticipating their successful completion of a challenging wilderness expedition and their return to the comfortable facilities available in Anchorage. The trail had gradually descended toward another major creek system, following a route that would eventually lead them back to the pickup location where Captain Mackenzie would be waiting with his helicopter. This section of trail passed through habitat that was slightly different from what they had experienced during the previous 2 days, with more open areas, different vegetation communities, and evidence of different wildlife species that preferred the ecological conditions created by the different topography and water sources. According to the map, we should reach the overlook point in about another mile, Brian had announced, while checking their progress against his planned schedule. That's where we'll have our best views of the pickup area, and it's also supposed to be an excellent location for photography of the surrounding mountains and valleys. After that, it's just 2 more miles of easy hiking to reach Mackenzie's landing zone. He had been pleased with their progress and timing, which was proceeding almost exactly according to their detailed itinerary. The overlook location, reached at approximately 11:15 a.m., had provided spectacular panoramic views of the surrounding landscape, including distant mountains, pristine valleys, multiple creek systems, and vast areas of unbroken wilderness that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Emily had been thrilled with the photographic opportunities, setting up her tripod and telephoto lens system to capture sweeping landscape images that would serve as perfect documentation of their expedition's spectacular setting. "This view is absolutely incredible," she had exclaimed while composing landscape shots with her wide-angle lens. "You can see for miles in every direction, and it's all pristine wilderness without any sign of human development. This is what North America looked like before European settlement, and it's incredible that places like this still exist." She'd spent considerable time at the overlook, shooting dozens of images from different positions and with various lens configurations to capture the full scope and majesty of the wilderness landscape. Samantha had used the overlook stop to complete final entries in her field journal, summarizing her observations about wildlife behavior, ecological relationships, and conservation implications of their wilderness experience. "This expedition has given me so much material for my research project," she had noted while writing. "The bear behavior we observed, the ecosystem relationships, the evidence of how wildlife populations are thriving in properly managed wilderness areas. It's exactly the kind of field experience that's invaluable for understanding wildlife management and conservation biology." She had been particularly excited about incorporating her observations into academic work that might contribute to improved wildlife management practices. Brian had used the overlook stop to confirm their final navigation plans and communicate with Captain Mackenzie via satellite communication device, confirming their pickup time and providing an updated estimate of their arrival at the designated landing zone. "Mackenzie confirms pickup at 2 p.m. as planned," he had reported to his friends. "Weather conditions remain perfect for flying, and he'll be monitoring our emergency frequencies in case any problems develop during our final approach to the landing zone." He had been satisfied that all logistical arrangements were proceeding perfectly for their departure from the wilderness. The final descent from the overlook toward their pickup location had taken them through terrain that was different from anything they had experienced during their expedition, with more open areas, different vegetation communities, and what appeared to be evidence of different wildlife populations adapted to the specific ecological conditions created by the topography and water sources in that particular valley. The trail conditions had remained excellent, with firm footing, clear sightlines, and manageable grades that allowed comfortable hiking even with their full packs after 3 days in the wilderness. "I can't believe this adventure is almost over," Emily had commented while hiking through a particularly beautiful section of trail that wound between massive, old-growth trees and opened occasionally into small meadows carpeted with late-season wildflowers. "It's been absolutely perfect from start to finish. Perfect weather, incredible wildlife encounters, amazing photography opportunities, great company, no problems or safety issues. Everything you could ask for in a wilderness expedition. She had been shooting photographs continuously, trying to capture final memories of their spectacular natural environment. It really has been an incredible experience, Samantha had agreed, while taking final notes about the changing ecological conditions as they descended toward their pickup location. The scientific value of this expedition has exceeded all my expectations. The behavioral observations, the ecosystem documentation, the hands-on experience with field research techniques. It's been like a graduate-level field course in wildlife biology and ecosystem management. She had been particularly excited about incorporating her field observations into academic presentations and research projects that might influence wildlife management policies. By noon, they had covered approximately 6 of the 8 miles to their pickup location and were well ahead of their planned schedule, allowing them time for extended photography stops and final observations of the spectacular wilderness environment they would soon be leaving behind. The final section of trail followed a well-established path that had been designed specifically to provide helicopter access to the wilderness area, while minimizing environmental impact on sensitive wildlife habitats and ecological communities. "We're making great time," Brian had announced while checking their position against the GPS coordinates for their designated pickup location. "At this pace, we'll reach the landing zone by 1 p.m., giving us an hour to relax, organize our equipment, and enjoy our final time in the wilderness before Mackenzie arrives for pickup." Everything is proceeding perfectly according to our plan. He had been satisfied with their expedition's successful completion and was looking forward to the helicopter flight back to civilization. The trail had continued through spectacular scenery, with frequent opportunities to observe wildlife, capture photographs, and simply appreciate the pristine beauty of one of North America's last great wilderness areas. All 3 friends had been in excellent spirits, energized by their successful expedition and excited about returning to Anchorage with spectacular photographs, valuable research data, and memories that would last a lifetime. The perfect weather had continued, with clear skies, comfortable temperatures, and light winds that created ideal conditions for their final day of hiking and their scheduled helicopter pickup. At approximately 12:30 p.m., with less than 2 miles remaining to their pickup location, the 3 friends had encountered what would later be determined to be a female Kodiak brown bear with 2 cubs, approximately 2 years old, in an area where thick vegetation on both sides of the trail created limited visibility and restricted options for avoiding close contact. The sow, later estimated by wildlife authorities to weigh approximately 900 pounds, had been foraging with her cubs in a dense thicket of elderberry bushes, approximately 50 yards from the trail, when the 3 humans had approached the area. The initial encounter had developed rapidly, with the bear family becoming aware of human presence at approximately the same time. The 3 friends had detected movement in the vegetation ahead of their position. Unlike their previous bear encounters, which had provided ample time for assessment and appropriate response, this situation had escalated quickly due to the limited visibility, the close proximity of the animals, and the protective behavior exhibited by the sow when she perceived potential threats to her cubs. "Stop!" Brian had commanded quietly but urgently when he had first detected movement in the vegetation ahead, immediately signaling his friends to halt their forward progress and prepare for a potential wildlife encounter. "There's something large moving in those bushes, and it's moving toward the trail. Everyone get your bear spray ready and prepare to back away slowly." He had immediately removed the safety clip from his bear spray canister and positioned himself between his friends and the potential threat while assessing the situation and planning their response strategy. Samantha had frozen in position while carefully observing the vegetation for signs that would help identify the wildlife they were encountering and assess the potential danger of their situation. "I can see movement, but I can't tell what it is yet," she had whispered while slowly reaching for her bear spray. "Whatever it is, it's large, and there might be more than one animal. We need to be ready for anything." She had been applying her wildlife biology training to assess the developing situation, but the limited visibility had made it difficult to gather the information needed for proper threat assessment. Emily had instinctively reached for her camera while also preparing her bear spray, torn between her desire to document what might be another spectacular wildlife encounter and her recognition that the situation was developing differently than their previous bear sightings. "Should I be taking pictures, or should I focus on safety procedures?" she had asked, while trying to balance her photographic objectives with the obvious need to prioritize personal safety in what appeared to be a more dangerous situation than they had previously encountered. The situation had escalated dramatically when the sow had suddenly emerged from the vegetation approximately 30 yards from their position, immediately followed by her two cubs, and had instantly focused her attention on the three humans while exhibiting clear signs of defensive behavior. The bear's ears had been laid back against her head, her mouth had been open, displaying her formidable teeth, and she had begun making huffing sounds that clearly indicated stress and agitation, rather than the curiosity they had observed in their previous bear encounters. "That's a sow with cubs," Samantha had announced with obvious concern in her voice. "This is completely different from our other encounters. She's exhibiting defensive behavior, and she's going to be extremely protective of her cubs. We need to back away immediately and give her as much space as possible." She had begun backing away slowly while keeping the bear family in sight and preparing to use her bear spray if the situation continued to deteriorate. The sow had responded to the human presence by moving directly toward them, while continuing to display increasingly agitated behavior, huffing loudly, clacking her teeth, and occasionally rising on her hind legs to better assess the threat she perceived the humans represented to her cubs. The cubs, appearing confused and frightened by their mother's agitation, had remained close to her, while occasionally climbing nearby trees in response to their mother's stress signals. "She's coming toward us," Brian had stated while backing away and preparing to deploy his bear spray. "Everyone stay calm, keep backing up slowly, avoid direct eye contact, and be ready to use bear spray if she gets within 20 feet of our position. Do not run unless I tell you to run, and do not make any sudden movements that might trigger a charge." He had been trying to maintain calm leadership while preparing for what appeared to be developing into a dangerous situation requiring immediate defensive action. Emily had continued photographing the encounter despite the obvious danger, capturing images of the sow's aggressive posturing and the cub's defensive behavior while backing away with her friends and preparing her bear spray for potential use. "I'm getting incredible shots of defensive behavior," she had whispered while continuing to shoot with her telephoto lens. "But this is getting scary. She's definitely not happy about us being here." She had been torn between her photographic objectives and her growing recognition that they were in a potentially life-threatening situation. The encounter had reached a critical point when the sow had begun what wildlife experts later determined was a bluff charge, running directly toward the three humans for approximately 15 yards before stopping and resuming her aggressive posturing. The bluff charge had been intended to drive the humans away from her cubs, but it had brought her close enough to the three friends that they could clearly see her massive size, formidable claws, and the intense focus of her attention on what she perceived as threats to her offspring. "Get your bear spray ready," Brian had commanded while preparing to deploy his canister. "If she charges again, we're going to have to spray her. Everyone stay together, back away slowly, and be ready to follow my lead." He had been fighting his natural instincts to run while maintaining the calm, non-threatening behavior that represented their best chance of surviving the encounter without serious injury or fatalities. The situation had deteriorated further when one of the cubs had become separated from its mother during her bluff charge, climbing a tree approximately 20 yards from the trail while crying distressfully for its mother. The sow's response to her separated cub had been immediate and intense, with her protective instincts completely overriding any remaining tolerance for human presence in the area. She had begun moving directly toward the three humans, while vocalizing loudly, clearly intending to drive them away from the vicinity of her distressed offspring. "She's not going to back down," Samantha had observed, while continuing to back away from the approaching bear. "Her cub is separated and distressed, and she's going to do whatever it takes to protect it. We need to get out of here right now, or we're going to have to spray her." She had been applying her knowledge of bear behavior to assess their rapidly deteriorating situation, recognizing that the protective instincts of a mother bear with cubs represented one of the most dangerous wildlife encounters possible in North American wilderness areas. The final escalation had occurred when the sow had initiated what appeared to be a genuine charge rather than another bluff, running directly toward the three humans at full speed with clear intent to make physical contact. Brian had deployed his bear spray when the bear was approximately 15 feet from their position, creating a large cloud of pepper spray that had initially caused the bear to stop and retreat several yards while shaking her head and pawing at her eyes and nose. "I got her with the spray," Brian had announced while preparing for a possible follow-up deployment. "But she's not leaving the area. Everyone keep backing up and be ready to spray again if she comes back." The bear spray had been effective in stopping the initial charge, but the sow had remained in the immediate area, continuing to vocalize aggressively while keeping herself positioned between the humans and her cubs. The temporary reprieve created by the bear spray deployment had given the three friends an opportunity to continue backing away from the encounter site while maintaining visual contact with the bear family and preparing for additional defensive actions if necessary. However, the sow's behavior had remained highly agitated, and it had become clear that she was not going to allow them to pass through the area as long as her cubs remained in the vicinity. "We need to get out of here," Emily had said while continuing to photograph the encounter despite the obvious danger. "She's not calming down, and we're running out of room to back up. The trail behind us gets narrow and steep, and if she charges again, we might not have enough space to deploy bear spray effectively." She had been recognizing that their tactical situation was becoming increasingly difficult as the terrain behind them became less favorable for defensive actions. The situation had reached its crisis point when the separated cub had fallen from the tree where it had sought refuge, landing heavily on the ground and crying even more distressfully than before. The sow's response had been immediate and overwhelming, with her protective instincts completely overriding any deterrent effect from the bear spray deployment. She had charged directly toward the three humans with obvious intent to eliminate what she perceived as the primary threat to her injured offspring. Brian had attempted to deploy his bear spray for a second time, but the canister had malfunctioned, possibly due to damage sustained during their wilderness travel or inadequate maintenance of the spray mechanism. His second attempt to stop the charging bear had failed completely, leaving the three friends with no effective means of defending themselves against a 900-pound predator that was determined to eliminate threats to her cubs. "The spray's not working," Brian had shouted while attempting to troubleshoot his malfunctioning equipment. "Everyone run for those trees, get behind something solid and try to get your spray working." He had made a desperate attempt to provide tactical leadership even as their defensive situation had collapsed completely, but the reality was that three college students with limited wilderness experience were no match for an enraged mother bear protecting her offspring. Samantha had attempted to deploy her backup bear spray canister, but the charging bear had reached their position before she could remove the safety clip and properly aim the device. The sow had struck Samantha with her massive paw, knocking her off the trail and into dense vegetation where she had landed heavily and been momentarily stunned by the impact. The bear had then focused her attention on Samantha, apparently identifying her as the primary threat that needed to be eliminated. "Samantha's down!" Emily had screamed, while fumbling with her own bear spray and attempting to position herself where she could help her injured friend. "The bear's going after Samantha. We have to help her." She had been overcome by the rapid deterioration of their situation and the obvious fact that her friend was in immediate mortal danger from a predator that weighed over 10 times as much as a human and possessed claws and teeth capable of inflicting fatal injuries within seconds. Brian had attempted to distract the bear by shouting and throwing rocks, but the sow had remained focused on Samantha, apparently convinced that eliminating this particular threat was necessary for protecting her cubs. The bear had positioned herself over Samantha's fallen form and had begun what wildlife experts later determined was typical predatory behavior, using her massive weight and powerful jaws to subdue what she perceived as a threat to her offspring. The attack had lasted approximately 3 minutes, during which time Brian and Emily had been unable to effectively intervene due to their malfunctioning bear spray equipment, their lack of other defensive weapons, and their understandable reluctance to approach close enough to a 900-pound predator to provide direct physical assistance to their friend. Their attempts to distract the bear by shouting, throwing objects, and making noise had been unsuccessful, as the sow had remained completely focused on what she perceived as the elimination of a threat to her cubs. Samantha had been conscious during the initial stages of the attack and had attempted to protect herself by assuming the recommended defensive position, lying face down, with her hands protecting her neck and her knees drawn up to protect her vital organs. However, the bear's size and strength had made these defensive measures inadequate, and she had sustained massive trauma to her head, neck, and torso that had rendered her unconscious within the first minute of the encounter. Emily had continued attempting to document the attack with her camera while simultaneously trying to deploy her bear spray, creating a photographic record that would later be invaluable for wildlife authorities investigating the incident. However, her images had captured the horrific reality of a predator attack that was beyond the ability of her friends to stop or survive, providing graphic documentation of the final moments of Samantha's life. Brian had finally succeeded in getting his backup bear spray canister operational and had deployed it against the attacking bear, but by that time, the damage had been done. The bear spray had caused the sow to abandon her attack and retreat with her cubs, but Samantha had sustained injuries that were clearly incompatible with survival, even if immediate medical attention had been available. "Samantha, can you hear me?" Emily had called while approaching her friend's motionless form. "Brian, we need to call for help right now. She's hurt really bad." She had been in shock from witnessing the attack but had attempted to provide first aid, despite her limited medical training and the obvious severity of her friend's injuries. Brian had immediately activated their emergency beacon and had begun transmitting distress signals that would alert search and rescue authorities to their location and the nature of their emergency. "Mayday, Mayday. This is an emergency beacon activation. We have had a fatal bear attack on Kodiak Island. We need immediate helicopter evacuation and medical assistance. GPS coordinates are being transmitted automatically." He had followed established emergency procedures while simultaneously attempting to assess Samantha's condition and provide whatever first aid might be possible. The emergency response had been immediate and comprehensive, with multiple agencies coordinating search and rescue operations that included helicopter evacuations, medical personnel, wildlife management specialists, and law enforcement investigators. Captain Mackenzie, who had been monitoring emergency frequencies in preparation for their scheduled pickup, had been among the first to respond, providing aerial reconnaissance of the attack site and coordinating with ground-based rescue personnel who were dispatched from Kodiak town. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the emergency medicine instructor who had taught the three friends their wilderness first aid course, had been part of the medical response team that had been helicoptered to the attack site. She had arrived approximately 45 minutes after the attack had occurred, but Samantha's injuries had been so severe that resuscitation efforts had been unsuccessful. The official cause of death had been determined to be massive trauma to the head and neck, with secondary injuries to the torso and extremities consistent with a bear attack. The wildlife management response had been led by Dr. Patricia Williams, the bear researcher who had provided pre-trip advice to the three friends about safe hiking procedures in bear country. Dr. Williams had arrived at the attack site within 2 hours of the incident, accompanied by a team of wildlife technicians and Alaska Department of Fish and Game enforcement officers who were responsible for conducting the official investigation into the circumstances surrounding Samantha's death. "This is exactly the kind of encounter we work so hard to prevent, Doctor," Williams had stated while examining the attack site and documenting the physical evidence that would be crucial for understanding what had gone wrong during what should have been a routine wildlife encounter. A sow with cubs in dense vegetation where visibility is limited. It's one of the most dangerous situations you can encounter in bear country, and even experienced outdoors people can find themselves in trouble when these conditions converge. The investigation had revealed that the three friends had followed most established safety protocols correctly, but several factors had combined to create a situation where a fatal encounter became almost inevitable. The bear spray malfunction had been identified as a critical equipment failure that had eliminated their primary means of defense against an aggressive bear, while the terrain and vegetation conditions had prevented them from maintaining adequate distance from the bear family once the encounter had begun. Alaska State Trooper Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez, who had been assigned to lead the law enforcement investigation into the incident, had arrived at the scene via helicopter approximately 3 hours after the attack had occurred. Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran of Alaska law enforcement with extensive experience in wilderness fatality investigations, had immediately begun documenting the physical evidence and interviewing the surviving witnesses to establish a complete timeline of events leading to Samantha's death. Based on preliminary evidence, this appears to be a defensive attack by a sow protecting her cubs rather than a predatory attack, Lieutenant Rodriguez had explained to Brian and Emily during their initial interviews. The bear's behavior was consistent with defensive responses to perceived threats, and the attack ended when the bear determined that the threat had been eliminated. This is an unfortunate example of how quickly wilderness encounters can escalate beyond human control, even when proper safety procedures are followed. The emergency evacuation of Brian and Emily had been accomplished using 2 helicopter flights, with both survivors requiring medical evaluation for shock, minor injuries sustained during their escape attempts, and psychological trauma associated with witnessing their friend's violent death. They had been transported to Providence Kodiak Island Medical Center, where Dr. Sarah Kim, the emergency department physician on duty, had conducted comprehensive medical examinations and coordinated with mental health specialists who were experienced in treating trauma survivors. Physical injuries are minimal, Dr. Kim had reported after completing her examination of both survivors. Minor abrasions and contusions consistent with running through dense vegetation, possible mild dehydration, and symptoms of acute stress reaction. However, the psychological trauma associated with witnessing a fatal bear attack will require specialized treatment and extended support. Both patients are exhibiting signs of acute stress disorder and will need immediate intervention to prevent development of chronic post-traumatic stress syndrome. Emily's camera equipment had been recovered from the attack site and had provided crucial photographic documentation of the encounter, including images of the Bear family, the attack sequence, and the aftermath of Samantha's death. These photographs, while disturbing and difficult to view, had provided wildlife authorities with unprecedented documentation of brown bear defensive behavior and had contributed significantly to the official investigation of the incident. The photographic evidence is invaluable for understanding exactly what happened during this encounter, Dr. Williams had explained while reviewing Emily's images with the investigation team. We can see the bear's body language, the positioning of the cubs, the terrain conditions, and the sequence of events that led to the fatal attack. This documentation will help us develop improved safety protocols and better educate wilderness users about the realities of bear encounters in Alaska. The media response to Samantha's death had been immediate and extensive, with news outlets throughout Alaska and the Pacific Northwest covering the story as an example of the ongoing risks associated with wilderness recreation in bear country. The University of Alaska Anchorage had issued official statements expressing condolences to Samantha's family and announcing plans for enhanced wilderness safety education for students participating in outdoor recreation programs. Samantha Larkin was an exceptional student with a passion for wildlife conservation and environmental protection, Dr. Chen had stated in her official comments to media representatives. Her death is a tragic reminder that wilderness areas remain wild places where natural processes continue regardless of human presence. Our thoughts and prayers are with her family, friends, and fellow students during this difficult time. The response from outdoor recreation and wildlife management communities had been equally significant, with numerous organizations using Samantha's death as an opportunity to emphasize the importance of proper equipment maintenance, emergency preparedness, and realistic assessment of risks associated with wilderness travel in predator habitat. Bear spray manufacturers had issued technical bulletins addressing proper maintenance and testing procedures for their products, while wilderness education organizations had developed new training modules specifically addressing female bear encounters. Every wilderness fatality teaches us something about the risks we face and the procedures we need to follow, explained Dr. Mark Thompson, director of the Alaska Wilderness Safety Council. Samantha's death, while tragic, provides valuable lessons about equipment reliability, group dynamics during emergency situations, and the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters. We have a responsibility to learn from this incident and use that knowledge to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The official investigation had required nearly 6 months to complete, involving detailed analysis of physical evidence, witness testimony, photographic documentation, and consultation with bear behavior experts from across North America. The final report, released by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in conjunction with Alaska State Troopers, had concluded that Samantha's death was the result of a defensive attack by a wild brown bear protecting her cubs, with no evidence of human error or negligence contributing to the fatal encounter. This incident represents the inherent risks associated with wilderness recreation in Alaska, the official report had concluded. While the deceased and her companions followed established safety protocols and carried appropriate emergency equipment, they encountered a situation where normal defensive measures proved inadequate against a large predator exhibiting protective behavior toward offspring. This tragic outcome demonstrates that wilderness areas remain dangerous environments where fatal encounters with wildlife can occur despite proper preparation and safety awareness. The legal proceedings following Samantha's death had been minimal, as the investigation had determined that no criminal liability existed and that all participants had acted reasonably under extremely difficult circumstances. However, her parents had initiated civil litigation against the bear spray manufacturer, alleging that equipment defects had contributed to their daughter's death by eliminating her primary means of defense against the attacking bear. Michael and Rebecca Larkin had filed their lawsuit in Alaska Superior Court 6 months after their daughter's death, seeking damages for wrongful death, pain and suffering, and punitive damages related to alleged manufacturing defects in bear spray equipment. The case had attracted significant attention from outdoor recreation industries and wilderness safety organizations, as it represented one of the first major legal challenges to bear spray manufacturers based on equipment failure during actual predator encounters. "Our daughter did everything right," Michael Larkin had stated during a press conference announcing the lawsuit. "She was trained, experienced, and properly equipped for wilderness travel. When she needed her safety equipment to work, it failed her, and that failure cost her life. We want to ensure that other families don't have to experience the loss we've endured because of defective safety equipment." The bear spray manufacturer, Ursine Defense Systems, had disputed the allegations and had retained expert witnesses who testified that proper maintenance and testing procedures would have prevented the equipment failure that occurred during Samantha's attack. The legal proceedings had continued for over 2 years, ultimately resulting in a confidential settlement that included provisions for improved quality control and testing procedures for bear spray products. Dr. Patricia Williams had continued her research into brown bear behavior, incorporating data from Samantha's attack into her ongoing studies of predator-human interactions in Alaska wilderness areas. Her subsequent publications had included detailed analysis of the factors that contributed to fatal bear encounters, with specific recommendations for improved safety protocols and equipment reliability standards for wilderness recreation participants. Samantha's death, while tragic, has contributed to our understanding of bear behavior and wilderness safety in ways that may help prevent similar incidents in the future, Dr. Williams had explained during a presentation at the International Conference on Bear Research and Management. The photographic documentation and detailed investigation of this incident provide unprecedented insights into the dynamics of defensive bear attacks and the effectiveness of various safety measures under actual field conditions. Brian Carter had struggled with severe post-traumatic stress disorder following the attack, requiring extensive psychological treatment and ultimately changing his academic focus from outdoor recreation management to counseling psychology, with a specialization in trauma recovery. He had become an advocate for improved wilderness safety education and had participated in numerous training programs designed to help outdoor recreation leaders understand and respond to wildlife emergencies. "I replay that day over and over in my mind," Brian had explained during his testimony at a wilderness safety conference 3 years after the attack. "I think about all the things we could have done differently, all the ways we might have prevented what happened to Samantha. The reality is that sometimes wilderness areas are just dangerous places where bad things happen to good people who are doing everything right. Our responsibility is to learn from these tragedies and do better in the future." Emily Ross had also experienced significant psychological trauma following the attack, but she had eventually returned to her photography studies with a renewed focus on wildlife conservation and habitat protection. Her photographs from the fatal encounter had been used in numerous educational programs and had contributed to improved understanding of bear behavior among wildlife management professionals and outdoor recreation participants. Samantha would have wanted her death to contribute to wildlife conservation and wilderness safety, Emily had explained, while donating her photographs to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game for educational purposes. If her story helps other people understand the realities of bear encounters and prevents even one similar tragedy, then something positive will have come from our terrible loss. The University of Alaska Anchorage had established the Samantha Larkin Memorial Scholarship in Wildlife Biology, providing financial assistance to students pursuing careers in wildlife conservation and wilderness management. The scholarship program had been funded through donations from outdoor recreation organizations, wildlife management agencies, and private individuals who wanted to honor Samantha's memory while supporting the next generation of wildlife professionals. Dr. Chen had served as the academic advisor for the scholarship program and had ensured that recipients were required to complete comprehensive wilderness safety training as a condition of their awards. Samantha was passionate about wildlife conservation and environmental protection, she had explained during the scholarship program's inaugural ceremony. This scholarship ensures that her commitment to wildlife and wilderness will continue through the work of future biologists and conservationists. The impact of Samantha's death had extended far beyond Alaska, influencing wilderness safety protocols and bear management policies throughout North America. Her story had been featured in numerous outdoor recreation publications, safety training programs, and wildlife management conferences as an example of how quickly wilderness encounters could escalate beyond human control. The North American Bear Center had incorporated detailed analysis of Samantha's attack into their educational programs, using her experience to illustrate the importance of equipment maintenance, group coordination during emergencies, and realistic assessment of risks associated with bear country travel. The center's director, Dr. Lynn Rogers, had emphasized that Samantha's death represented the kind of rare but devastating incident that highlighted the wild nature of wilderness areas. Wilderness areas are not theme parks or zoos where wildlife behavior is controlled and predictable, Dr. Rogers had explained during a memorial presentation honoring Samantha's memory. They are wild places where natural processes continue regardless of human presence, and where encounters between humans and large predators can have tragic consequences despite proper preparation and safety awareness. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game had implemented new requirements for bear spray testing and maintenance based on lessons learned from the investigation into Samantha's death. All bear spray devices sold in Alaska were now required to include detailed maintenance instructions, expiration date labeling, and recommendations for periodic testing to ensure proper function when needed for emergency defense. Equipment failure during a bear encounter can have fatal consequences, explained Alaska Fish and Game Director Robert Mitchell during the announcement of new bear spray regulations. Samantha Larkin's death taught us that even the best safety training and wilderness experience cannot overcome equipment failure at critical moments. We have a responsibility to ensure that safety equipment meets the highest standards of reliability and performance. The sow and her cubs involved in the fatal attack had been tracked and monitored by wildlife authorities for several months following the incident, but they had not been destroyed or relocated, as their behavior was determined to be normal, defensive response rather than aberrant predatory behavior. The bear family had continued to use the same general area for foraging and travel, though the specific attack site had been temporarily closed to human access to allow the bears to resume normal behavioral patterns without continued human disturbance. This was not a rogue bear or an animal exhibiting abnormal predatory behavior, Dr. Williams had explained during the post-incident wildlife management review. This was a mother bear protecting her cubs in a situation where she perceived humans as threats to her offspring. Destroying these animals would serve no conservation or safety purpose, as their behavior was entirely consistent with normal brown bear maternal protective instincts. The temporary closure of the attack site had been lifted after 1 full year, but new safety protocols had been implemented, including improved signage warning of bear activity, mandatory bear spray inspections at trailheads, and enhanced communication systems allowing wilderness users to report bear encounters and receive current wildlife activity updates. These improvements had been funded partially through donations collected in Samantha's memory and partially through increased wilderness permit fees dedicated to safety infrastructure enhancement. The anniversary of Samantha's death had been marked by memorial services at the University of Alaska Anchorage and at the Kodiak Island attack site, with participants including her family, friends, classmates, wilderness safety professionals, and wildlife management personnel who had been involved in the investigation and response. These commemorative events had served both to honor Samantha's memory and to reinforce important lessons about wilderness safety and wildlife conservation. Samantha loved the wilderness and understood its dangers, her mother Rebecca had said during the memorial service at UAA. She knew that wilderness areas are wild places where natural processes continue regardless of human presence. Her death was tragic, but it was not meaningless if we learn from her experience and use that knowledge to protect both people and wildlife in the future. The long-term psychological impact on Brian and Emily had been significant and lasting, requiring ongoing therapeutic support and fundamentally changing their relationship with wilderness, recreation, and wildlife. Both survivors had become advocates for improved wilderness safety education, but neither had returned to the kind of extended wilderness camping that had been the focus of their interrupted expedition to Kodiak Island. I still love the outdoors, and I still believe in the importance of wilderness conservation, Brian had explained during a psychological recovery workshop for wilderness trauma survivors. But my relationship with wild places has changed permanently. I understand now in a way I didn't before that wilderness areas are genuinely dangerous places where fatal encounters can occur despite proper preparation and safety awareness. That understanding has made me a more cautious and thoughtful outdoor recreationist. Emily's photographic work had evolved to focus primarily on wildlife conservation issues and habitat protection rather than the adventure photography that had originally motivated her interest in wilderness areas. Her images from the fatal bear encounter had been used in numerous educational contexts, but she had struggled with the ethical implications of profiting from photographs that documented her friend's death. Those photographs are some of the most powerful and technically accomplished images I've ever captured, she had explained during an interview with Outdoor Photography magazine. But they document the worst day of my life and the death of my best friend. I've donated them for educational use because I believe they can help prevent similar tragedies, but I'll never display them as artistic works or sell them for commercial purposes. The scientific legacy of Samantha's death had been substantial, contributing to improved understanding of brown bear behavior, mother-cub relationships, defensive attack patterns, and the effectiveness of various safety measures under actual field conditions. Her case had been cited in numerous peer-reviewed publications and had influenced wildlife management policies throughout North America. Dr. Williams had published a comprehensive analysis of the incident in the Journal of Wildlife Management, incorporating Emily's photographic documentation, detailed behavioral observations, and physical evidence analysis to create one of the most complete records of a fatal bear encounter ever documented. The publication had become required reading in wildlife management and outdoor recreation programs throughout North America. Samantha's death provided unprecedented scientific documentation of brown bear defensive behavior and mother-cub protective responses, Dr. Williams had written in her published analysis. While the tragic nature of this incident makes it difficult to discuss in purely scientific terms, the detailed documentation available provides invaluable insights that will contribute to improved safety protocols and better understanding of predator-human interactions in wilderness environments. The bear spray industry had implemented significant improvements in product design, testing procedures, and maintenance requirements following the investigation into equipment failures that had contributed to Samantha's death. New industry standards had been developed requiring more frequent testing, improved durability specifications, and enhanced user education programs for wilderness safety equipment. The outdoor recreation industry has a responsibility to provide reliable safety equipment that performs when lives depend on it, explained Dr. James Peterson, director of the Outdoor Industry Safety Consortium. Samantha Larkin's death highlighted critical gaps in our testing and maintenance procedures that have now been addressed through improved industry standards and user education programs. The University of Alaska Anchorage had implemented comprehensive wilderness safety requirements for all students participating in outdoor recreation programs, including mandatory equipment inspection, psychological screening for trauma resilience, and enhanced emergency response training. These improvements had been designed to prevent similar tragedies, while still allowing students to pursue legitimate educational and research objectives in wilderness environments. We cannot eliminate all risks associated with wilderness education and research, explained Dr. Robert Anderson, UAA's Director of Outdoor Programs. But we can ensure that students are properly prepared, adequately equipped, and thoroughly trained to minimize risks and respond effectively when emergencies occur. Samantha's death taught us that even excellent students with proper training can encounter situations beyond their control. But we have a responsibility to do everything possible to prevent similar tragedies. The impact on Alaska's tourism and outdoor recreation industries had been significant but temporary, with some visitors choosing alternative destinations due to concerns about bear encounters, while others were attracted by the opportunity to experience truly wild landscapes where natural processes remained uncontrolled by human management. Overall visitation to Kodiak Island had declined by approximately 15% in the year following Samantha's death, but had returned to normal levels within 2 years as improved safety protocols and enhanced educational programs restored confidence in wilderness recreation opportunities. Alaska's wilderness areas remain among the most spectacular and rewarding outdoor recreation destinations in the world, explained Tom Harrison, director of the Alaska Division of Tourism. Samantha Larkin's death was a tragic reminder that wilderness areas are genuinely wild places where encounters with large predators can occur. But millions of visitors enjoy safe and memorable wilderness experiences in Alaska every year. The key is proper preparation, realistic assessment of risks, and respect for the wild nature of these special places. The family's civil litigation against the bear spray manufacturer had ultimately resulted in a confidential settlement that included provisions for improved quality control, enhanced testing procedures, and funding for wilderness safety education programs. While the specific terms of the settlement were not disclosed, industry observers believed it had established important precedents for product liability in wilderness safety equipment. This settlement sends a clear message that manufacturers of wilderness safety equipment must ensure their products perform reliably when lives depend on them, explained attorney Sarah Collins, who had represented the Larkin family in their lawsuit. While we cannot bring Samantha back, we hope this settlement will result in improved safety equipment that prevents similar tragedies in the future. The psychological research conducted on Brian and Emily had contributed to improved understanding of trauma responses among wilderness recreation participants and had influenced treatment protocols for survivors of wildlife attacks. Their experiences had been documented in several psychological journals and had contributed to development of specialized therapy programs for outdoor recreation trauma survivors. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the clinical psychologist who had treated both survivors, had published detailed case studies examining the long-term psychological impact of witnessing fatal wildlife attacks. Her research had identified specific treatment approaches that were most effective for helping wilderness trauma survivors recover while maintaining their connection to outdoor recreation and environmental conservation. Wilderness trauma presents unique psychological challenges that require specialized treatment approaches, Dr. Walsh had explained in her published research. Survivors often struggle with conflicting emotions about wilderness areas, maintaining their love for natural environments while dealing with traumatic memories associated with specific locations and activities. Effective treatment must address both the trauma symptoms and the relationship with outdoor recreation that is often central to the survivor's identity. The annual memorial expeditions organized by UAA's Environmental Science Program had become important traditions that honored Samantha's memory while providing educational opportunities for current students to learn about wilderness safety and wildlife conservation. These expeditions, conducted with enhanced safety protocols and under professional leadership, had allowed hundreds of students to experience the kind of pristine wilderness that Samantha had loved while learning about the responsibilities and risks associated with wilderness recreation. Samantha would have wanted students to continue exploring and learning from Alaska's wilderness areas, Dr. Chen had explained during the 5th annual memorial expedition. These trips allow us to honor her memory while providing current students with the kind of hands-on learning experiences that were so important to her academic and personal development. We conduct these expeditions with enhanced safety protocols and professional leadership, but we maintain the spirit of exploration and discovery that motivated Samantha's love for the outdoors. The impact on Kodiak Island's bear management policies had been substantial, with enhanced monitoring of bear-human interactions, improved visitor safety, and increased public awareness of bear behavior education programs, and modified trail management practices designed to reduce the likelihood of surprise encounters between humans and bears with cubs. These improvements had been funded through increased permit fees and federal grants dedicated to human-wildlife conflict prevention. Samantha's death highlighted the need for more proactive management of human-bear interactions in high-use recreation areas, explained Dr. Williams, who had continued her research and management work on Kodiak Island. We've implemented improved monitoring systems, enhanced visitor education, and modified trail designs to reduce the likelihood of surprise encounters in areas where bears frequently travel with cubs. These improvements honor Samantha's memory while helping to prevent similar tragedies. The international impact of Samantha's story had extended to bear management programs throughout North America and Europe, with her case being studied by wildlife managers dealing with human-predator conflicts in diverse ecosystems. The detailed documentation of her attack had provided valuable insights for managers working with brown bears, black bears, polar bears, and other large carnivores in areas where human recreation and wildlife habitat overlapped. The Canadian Park Service had incorporated lessons learned from Samantha's death into their bear safety programs, while European wildlife managers had used her case to improve safety protocols for visitors to areas inhabited by European brown bears. Her story had become part of international best practices for managing human-wildlife conflicts in protected areas and wilderness recreation zones. Predator-human conflicts are a global conservation and safety challenge, explained Dr. Marco Festa-Bianchi, a wildlife biologist with Parks Canada. Samantha Larkin's case provides detailed documentation of how quickly these encounters can escalate and how important proper preparation and equipment reliability are for preventing tragic outcomes. Her story has influenced safety protocols and management practices throughout the international conservation community. The legacy of Samantha's research interests had been continued through the work of graduate students who had received scholarships in her memory, and had focused their studies on human-wildlife conflict prevention and wilderness safety. Several master's theses and doctoral dissertations had been completed by scholarship recipients who had built upon the wildlife behavior observations that Samantha had documented during her abbreviated final expedition. One scholarship recipient, Maria Santos, had completed a master's thesis examining the effectiveness of various bear deterrent systems under controlled conditions using data from Samantha's attack to inform her experimental design. Another recipient, David Kim, had focused his doctoral research on the psychological factors that influence decision-making during wildlife emergencies, incorporating interviews with Brian and Emily into his comprehensive analysis of human behavior during predator encounters. Samantha's passion for wildlife research continues through the work of scholarship recipients who are advancing our understanding of human-wildlife interactions, Dr. Chen had explained during a symposium honoring the 10th anniversary of Samantha's death. Her commitment to scientific rigor and practical application of research findings lives on through students who are addressing the same conservation challenges that motivated her academic interests. The technological improvements in wilderness safety equipment that had resulted from investigation into Samantha's death had included development of more reliable bear spray delivery systems, improved emergency communication devices, and enhanced GPS tracking systems that allowed real-time monitoring of wilderness recreation participants. These innovations had been tested under actual field conditions and had demonstrated improved performance compared to the equipment available at the time of Samantha's attack. Bear spray manufacturers had developed new testing protocols that simulated the temperature variations, physical stress, and storage conditions that equipment experienced during extended wilderness expeditions. These improved testing procedures had identified several design weaknesses that had been corrected through enhanced materials and manufacturing processes. Emergency communication device manufacturers had developed more reliable satellite communication systems with improved battery life, enhanced signal strength, and simplified operation procedures that allowed wilderness users to summon help more quickly and effectively during emergency situations. These improvements had been credited with preventing several potential tragedies in Alaska wilderness areas. The wilderness rescue and emergency response improvements that had been implemented following Samantha's death had included enhanced helicopter capabilities, improved medical equipment positioning, and better coordination between multiple agencies responsible for wilderness emergency response. These improvements had reduced response times and improved survival rates for wilderness medical emergencies throughout Alaska. Samantha's death highlighted critical gaps in our wilderness emergency response capabilities, explained Captain Robert Mackenzie, who had continued his aviation career with a focus on wilderness rescue operations. The improvements we've implemented since then have saved lives and will continue to benefit wilderness recreation participants for many years to come. Her tragedy contributed to making wilderness areas safer for everyone who follows proper safety protocols. The educational impact of Samantha's story had been incorporated into wilderness safety curricula throughout North America, with her case being used to illustrate the importance of equipment maintenance, group coordination during emergencies, and realistic assessment of risks associated with wilderness recreation in predator habitat. Thousands of outdoor recreation participants had learned from her experience through safety courses, educational publications, and training programs. The Wilderness Education Association had developed a comprehensive case study based on Samantha's attack that was used in wilderness leadership courses throughout the United States and Canada. The case study included detailed analysis of decision-making processes, equipment failures, and emergency response procedures, providing students with realistic scenarios for understanding wilderness risk management. Samantha's case provides an invaluable learning opportunity for wilderness educators and recreation leaders, explained Dr. Mark Thompson, president of the Wilderness Education Association. Her story illustrates how multiple factors can combine to create dangerous situations, even when participants are well-trained and properly equipped. Learning from her experience helps current and future wilderness leaders better understand and manage the risks associated with backcountry recreation. The conservation legacy of Samantha's work had been continued through habitat protection initiatives and wildlife research programs that had been established in her memory. The Samantha Larkin Wildlife Research Fund had supported numerous studies examining predator-prey relationships, habitat requirements, and human-wildlife conflict prevention in Alaska and other North American wilderness areas. Research funded through the Memorial Program had contributed to improved understanding of brown bear ecology, enhanced wildlife management techniques, and better strategies for minimizing human-wildlife conflicts while maintaining healthy predator populations. These studies had honored Samantha's commitment to evidence-based conservation while advancing the scientific knowledge needed for effective wildlife management. Samantha understood that effective wildlife conservation required solid scientific research and practical application of research findings, Dr. Williams had explained during a research symposium funded by the Memorial Program. The studies supported by her Memorial Fund continue her commitment to science-based conservation and help ensure that future generations will be able to experience the kind of pristine wilderness that she loved so much. The impact on her immediate family had been devastating and long-lasting, with both parents requiring extensive counseling and support to cope with the loss of their only child. Michael Larkin had taken early retirement from his petroleum engineering career, while Rebecca had reduced her teaching responsibilities to focus on grief counseling and memorial activities honoring their daughter's memory. Losing Samantha changed everything about our lives, Rebecca had explained during a grief support group session for parents who had lost children in wilderness accidents. She was our only child, our pride and joy, our hope for the future. Learning to live without her has been the most difficult challenge we've ever faced, but we've found some comfort in knowing that her story helps protect other young people who share her love for wilderness and wildlife. The family had established a private foundation that supported wilderness safety education, wildlife research, and scholarship programs for students pursuing careers in environmental science and wildlife conservation. The foundation had funded numerous projects throughout Alaska and had contributed to improved safety protocols that had prevented several potential tragedies. We can't bring Samantha back, but we can honor her memory by supporting the causes she cared about and helping prevent other families from experiencing the loss we've endured. Michael had explained during the Foundation's annual meeting. Every scholarship recipient, every research project, every safety improvement represents a positive legacy from our daughter's life and work. The spiritual and philosophical impact of Samantha's death had raised profound questions about the relationship between humans and wilderness, the acceptable level of risk associated with outdoor recreation, and the responsibilities of wilderness management agencies to balance access with safety. These discussions had influenced wilderness management policies and had contributed to ongoing debates about appropriate use of wildlands. Some conservation philosophers had argued that Samantha's death represented the natural consequence of human intrusion into wild ecosystems where predators remained apex species with legitimate territorial and protective behaviors. Others had suggested that improved management and safety protocols could reduce risks while still allowing meaningful wilderness experiences for recreation and education participants. Wilderness areas represent the few remaining places where natural processes continue largely uncontrolled by human management, explained environmental philosopher Dr. Lisa Davidson. Samantha's death, while tragic, occurred in a place where bears remain wild predators with natural behavioral responses to perceived threats. The question for society is how to balance human access to these special places with acceptance of the genuine risks that wilderness areas represent. The memorial website established by Samantha's family and friends had become a comprehensive resource for wilderness safety information, including equipment recommendations, training opportunities, emergency procedures, and detailed analysis of lessons learned from her tragic experience. The website had received millions of visitors from around the world and had been credited with influencing safety practices for wilderness recreation participants internationally. Samantha's story continues to educate and inspire people who share her love for wilderness and wildlife, Emily had explained while serving as a volunteer administrator for the memorial website. Every person who learns from her experience and improves their own safety preparation honors her memory and contributes to preventing similar tragedies. Her death was senseless and tragic, but if it helps other people stay safe in the wilderness, then something positive comes from our terrible loss. The decade following Samantha's death had seen significant improvements in wilderness safety equipment, emergency response capabilities, educational programs, and management protocols that had been directly influenced by lessons learned from her tragic experience. While the specific circumstances of her attack could not have been prevented through any reasonable safety measures, the broader implications of her death had contributed to enhanced safety for thousands of wilderness recreation participants. We cannot eliminate all risks associated with wilderness recreation, nor should we try to do so, because risk is part of what makes wilderness areas special and meaningful, Dr. Thompson had concluded during a comprehensive review of wilderness safety improvements implemented since Samantha's death. But we can learn from tragic incidents like Samantha's attack and use that knowledge to help people make better decisions, use more reliable equipment, and respond more effectively when emergencies occur. Her death was a terrible loss, but her legacy continues to protect people who share her love for wild places. The impact of Samantha's story on individual wilderness recreation participants had been profound and widespread, with many outdoor enthusiasts citing her experience as motivation for improving their own safety preparation, equipment maintenance, and emergency response training. Online forums and social media groups dedicated to wilderness recreation frequently referenced her case when discussing safety protocols and risk management strategies. Reading about Samantha's attack completely changed how I approach wilderness recreation, explained Jennifer Torres, a backpacker from Colorado who had modified her safety protocols after learning about the incident. I now test my bear spray before every trip, carry multiple backup devices, and spend much more time planning emergency response procedures. Her story taught me that even experienced people can encounter situations beyond their control, so proper preparation is absolutely essential. The broader cultural impact of Samantha's death had contributed to ongoing discussions about the role of wilderness areas in modern society, the responsibilities of recreational users in wild environments, and the balance between adventure tourism and conservation objectives. Her story had been featured in documentaries, books, and educational programs that explored the complex relationships between humans and wild landscapes. Documentary filmmaker Mark Rodriguez had produced a comprehensive film examining Samantha's life, her fatal expedition, and the broader implications of human-wildlife conflicts in North American wilderness areas. The documentary had been shown at film festivals throughout the world and had been used in educational contexts to promote understanding of wilderness safety and wildlife conservation issues. Samantha's story illustrates both the beauty and the danger of truly wild places, Rodriguez had explained during interviews promoting his documentary. Her death was tragic, but her love for wilderness and wildlife represents the kind of connection to natural environments that is essential for effective conservation. We need people who are willing to accept reasonable risks to experience and protect wild places, but we also need to learn from tragedies like hers to make wilderness recreation as safe as possible. The international scientific community had continued to study and reference Samantha's case as an example of predator-human interactions in wilderness environments, with her attack being cited in peer-reviewed publications examining wildlife behavior, safety equipment effectiveness, and emergency response procedures. The detailed documentation available from her case had provided researchers with unique insights into the dynamics of fatal wildlife encounters. Research institutions throughout North America and Europe had incorporated data from Samantha's attack into their studies of large carnivore behavior, human-wildlife conflict prevention, and wilderness safety protocols. Her case had contributed to improved understanding of brown bear maternal behavior, defensive attack patterns, and the effectiveness of various deterrent systems under actual field conditions. Samantha's case represents one of the most thoroughly documented fatal bear attacks in the scientific literature, explained Dr. Susan Morrison, a wildlife behavioral researcher at the University of British Columbia. The photographic evidence, witness testimony, and detailed investigation provide unprecedented insights into the factors that contribute to fatal wildlife encounters. Her tragic experience continues to inform research and management practices that benefit both human safety and wildlife conservation. The technological legacy of improvements inspired by Samantha's death had continued to evolve, with new innovations in wilderness safety equipment, emergency communication systems, and wildlife deterrent devices being developed and tested under increasingly realistic conditions. Manufacturers had invested significantly in research and development programs designed to create more reliable safety equipment for wilderness recreation participants. Advanced bear spray delivery systems had been developed incorporating improved propellant formulations, enhanced dispersion patterns, and more reliable deployment mechanisms that addressed the equipment failures that had contributed to Samantha's death. These improvements had been tested extensively under various environmental conditions and had demonstrated significantly improved performance compared to earlier designs. Emergency communication device technology had advanced dramatically, with new satellite communication systems providing more reliable connectivity, longer battery life, and simplified operation procedures that allowed wilderness users to summon help more quickly and effectively during emergency situations. These improvements had been credited with facilitating successful rescues in numerous wilderness emergencies throughout Alaska and other remote areas. The technological improvements that have resulted from studying Samantha's case represent significant advances in wilderness safety capabilities, explained Dr. Peterson from the Outdoor Industry Safety Consortium. While we cannot prevent all wilderness accidents, we have developed much more reliable equipment and communication systems that give wilderness recreation participants better tools for preventing and responding to emergency situations. The Memorial Scholarship Program established in Samantha's honor had supported over 100 students pursuing careers in wildlife biology, environmental science, and outdoor recreation management during the decade following her death. These scholarship recipients had gone on to work for government agencies, non-profit organizations, and private companies throughout North America, contributing to improved wildlife management and wilderness safety practices. Many scholarship recipients had specifically focused their academic and professional work on issues related to human-wildlife conflict prevention, wilderness safety education, and predator conservation, carrying forward Samantha's commitment to science-based conservation and public education. Their contributions had multiplied the impact of her legacy far beyond what she could have accomplished during her abbreviated life. Samantha's influence continues through the work of scholarship recipients who share her passion for wildlife and wilderness, Dr. Chen had explained during the program's 10th anniversary celebration. These students and professionals are advancing conservation science, improving safety protocols, and educating the next generation of wildlife biologists and outdoor recreation leaders. Her commitment to excellence and public service lives on through their contributions to conservation and safety. The ongoing impact on Brian and Emily had been significant, but had also demonstrated human resilience and the possibility of finding meaning and purpose in the aftermath of trauma. Both survivors had rebuilt their lives around service to others and contributions to wilderness safety, transforming their tragic experience into positive influences on outdoor recreation and wildlife conservation. Brian had completed his graduate studies in counseling psychology and had developed specialized therapy programs for wilderness trauma survivors. His professional work had helped dozens of individuals recover from wildlife attacks, outdoor accidents, and other wilderness-related traumatic experiences, providing expert treatment based on his personal understanding of trauma recovery processes. My experience with Samantha's death taught me about the healing power of helping others who have faced similar traumas, Brian had explained during a presentation at a wilderness medicine conference. While I would never wish what happened to us on anyone else, I've been able to use my experience to help other trauma survivors understand that recovery is possible and that meaningful life can continue after devastating loss. Emily had continued her photography career with a focus on wildlife conservation and had become a respected advocate for wilderness safety education. Her photographs had been featured in numerous conservation publications and had contributed to public awareness of wildlife conservation issues and wilderness safety practices throughout North America. Samantha's death changed the direction of my life and work, but it also deepened my commitment to wildlife conservation and wilderness protection, Emily had explained during an interview with National Geographic. Every photograph I take, every article I write, every presentation I give includes some element of her influence and her commitment to protecting the wild places and wildlife that she loved so much. The broader impact on wilderness recreation culture had been substantial, with Samantha's story influencing safety practices, equipment choices, and risk assessment procedures among outdoor enthusiasts throughout North America. Online communities, guidebooks, and educational programs regularly referenced her case when discussing wilderness safety and wildlife encounter protocols. Wilderness recreation organizations had incorporated detailed analysis of her attack into their safety training curricula, using her experience to illustrate the importance of proper preparation, equipment maintenance, and emergency response procedures. These educational programs had reached thousands of outdoor recreation participants and had contributed to improved safety practices throughout the wilderness recreation community. Samantha's story has become an essential part of wilderness safety education because it illustrates how quickly situations can escalate beyond human control even when people are doing everything right, explained Sarah Mitchell, Education Director for the American Alpine Club. Her case teaches humility about the risks we face in wild places and emphasizes the importance of proper preparation and realistic assessment of wilderness hazards. The conservation impact of Samantha's legacy had extended to habitat protection initiatives, wildlife research programs, and policy advocacy efforts that had been inspired by her commitment to environmental protection and wildlife conservation. Organizations throughout Alaska and the Pacific Northwest had dedicated specific projects to her memory, while advancing conservation objectives that reflected her values and interests. The Samantha Larkin Wildlife Corridor Project had protected over 50,000 acres of critical habitat connecting fragmented ecosystems and providing movement corridors for bears and other large mammals throughout southwestern Alaska. This protection had been achieved through partnerships between government agencies, conservation organizations, and private landowners who were motivated by Samantha's story and her commitment to science-based conservation. Samantha understood that wildlife conservation required protecting entire ecosystems and landscape-scale habitat connectivity, explained Dr. Williams, who had served as scientific advisor for the Corridor Project. The habitat protection achieved in her memory provides lasting benefits for the bear populations she studied and loved, while honoring her commitment to evidence-based conservation and long-term ecosystem protection. The annual conference on human-wildlife conflict prevention that had been established in Samantha's memory had become a premier international forum for sharing research findings, management strategies, and educational approaches related to predator-human interactions in wilderness and urban environments. The conference had attracted participants from throughout North America, Europe, and Asia who were working on similar conservation and safety challenges. Research presentations at the conference had covered topics ranging from technological innovations in wildlife deterrent systems to psychological factors influencing human behavior during wildlife encounters to policy approaches for managing human-wildlife conflicts in various cultural and economic contexts. The conference had facilitated collaboration between researchers, managers, and educators working on human-wildlife issues throughout the world. This conference represents the kind of international collaboration and scientific exchange that Samantha would have valued, Dr. Morrison had explained during the conference's 5th anniversary keynote presentation. Her tragic death brought together researchers and practitioners from many different fields who are working to prevent similar incidents while maintaining healthy wildlife populations and meaningful wilderness experiences for humans. The long-term psychological research that had been conducted on wilderness trauma survivors had been significantly influenced by Brian and Emily's experiences and had contributed to improved understanding of trauma recovery processes among outdoor recreation participants. This research had informed treatment protocols used by mental health professionals throughout North America who work with wilderness trauma survivors. Studies of post-traumatic growth following wilderness trauma had identified specific factors that contributed to positive adaptation and meaningful life reconstruction after devastating outdoor accidents. These findings had been incorporated into therapy programs and had helped numerous trauma survivors find purpose and direction in their recovery processes. Research on wilderness trauma recovery has shown that survivors can often find meaning and purpose in their experiences by helping others and contributing to improved safety practices, Dr. Walsh had explained in her comprehensive study of wilderness trauma survivors. Brian and Emily's experiences illustrate how trauma survivors can transform their suffering into positive contributions to outdoor recreation, safety, and wildlife conservation. The impact on families of wilderness recreation participants had been significant, with many parents and spouses citing Samantha's story as motivation for improved communication, safety planning, and emergency preparedness related to outdoor recreation activities. Family members had become more actively involved in safety preparation and had developed better understanding of risks associated with wilderness recreation. Support groups for families of wilderness recreation participants had been established in several states, providing forums for discussing concerns, sharing safety information, and supporting each other through the challenges of loving people who engage in potentially dangerous outdoor activities. These groups had used Samantha's story as an example of both the risks and rewards associated with wilderness recreation. Samantha's story helped our family understand that wilderness recreation involves real risks that cannot be eliminated through preparation and safety equipment, explained Janet Morrison, whose son is a professional mountaineering guide. But it also reinforced our understanding that these risks are part of what makes wilderness experiences meaningful and valuable. We've become more involved in his safety planning while still supporting his passion for wild places. The influence on wilderness management policies had been substantial and lasting, with agencies throughout North America implementing improved safety protocols, enhanced visitor education programs, and modified trail management practices that had been informed by lessons learned from Samantha's attack. These improvements had been designed to reduce risks while maintaining the wild character of wilderness areas. Trail design modifications had been implemented in high-use bear habitat areas, creating better sightlines, reducing vegetation that could conceal approaching wildlife, and providing more options for visitors to avoid close encounters with potentially dangerous animals. These modifications had been carefully designed to improve safety without significantly altering the natural character of wilderness environments. Wilderness management requires balancing human safety with preservation of natural, ecological processes, explained Dr. Robert Chen, Director of Wilderness Management for the National Park Service. Samantha's case provided valuable insights into how we can modify our management practices to reduce risks without compromising the wild character that makes these places special and valuable for conservation and recreation. The educational impact on current and future wildlife biologists had been profound, with Samantha's case being studied in university courses throughout North America as an example of both the rewards and risks associated with wildlife research and conservation work. Her story had influenced career choices and had motivated many students to pursue wildlife conservation while maintaining realistic awareness of associated hazards. Wildlife biology and environmental science programs had incorporated detailed analysis of her case into their curricula, using her experience to teach students about field research safety, wildlife behavior, and the ethical responsibilities associated with working in wild environments. These educational programs had reached thousands of students who were pursuing careers in wildlife-related fields. Samantha's case provides an invaluable learning opportunity for students who are considering careers in wildlife biology and conservation, Dr. Chen had explained during a curriculum development workshop. Her passion for wildlife and her tragic death illustrate both the inspirational and sobering aspects of working with wild animals in natural environments. Students need to understand both the rewards and risks associated with wildlife conservation careers. The influence on outdoor education and wilderness therapy programs had been significant, with many organizations implementing enhanced safety protocols and modified risk management procedures based on lessons learned from Samantha's experience. These programs had developed improved procedures for managing groups in bear habitat while maintaining the therapeutic and educational benefits of wilderness experiences. Wilderness therapy programs had incorporated detailed analysis of Samantha's case into their staff training curricula, using her experience to teach leaders about group management during wildlife encounters, equipment maintenance procedures, and emergency response protocols. These improvements had enhanced safety for thousands of participants in wilderness therapy and education programs. Wilderness therapy and education programs must balance therapeutic objectives with participant safety in environments where genuine risks exist, explained Dr. Michael Thompson, director of the National Association of Wilderness Therapy Programs. Samantha's case taught us important lessons about group dynamics during emergency situations and the importance of reliable safety equipment when working with vulnerable populations in wild environments. The memorial exhibits and educational displays that had been established in her honor at various museums and visitor centers throughout Alaska had provided millions of visitors with information about wilderness safety, wildlife behavior, and conservation issues related to human-predator interactions. These exhibits had combined tribute to Samantha's memory with practical education about coexisting with large predators in wilderness environments. The Alaska Museum of Natural History had created a comprehensive exhibit examining predator-human relationships in Alaska, featuring Samantha's story as one example of the complex interactions between humans and wildlife in wilderness areas. The exhibit had attracted visitors from throughout the world and had been praised for its balanced presentation of both conservation and safety perspectives. This exhibit honors Samantha's memory while educating visitors about the realities of living and recreating in areas inhabited by large predators, explained Museum Director Dr. Patricia Johnson. Her story illustrates both the beauty and danger of truly wild places, and it helps visitors understand their responsibilities when entering wilderness areas where natural predator-prey relationships remain intact. The international influence of Samantha's story had extended to conservation and safety programs in countries throughout the world where humans and large predators shared landscapes. Her case had been studied by wildlife managers in Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, Asia, and South America who were dealing with similar human-wildlife conflict issues in their respective regions. The International Union for Conservation of Nature had included analysis of Samantha's case in their guidelines for managing human-carnivore conflicts, using her experience to illustrate the importance of proper safety equipment, emergency response procedures, and realistic risk assessment in areas inhabited by large predators. Human-carnivore conflicts represent a global conservation challenge that requires sharing knowledge and best practices between different regions and cultures, explained Dr. Luigi Boitani, chair of the IUCN Bear and Canid Specialist Group. Samantha's case provides valuable lessons that apply to human-predator interactions throughout the world, and her story has influenced safety and management practices in many different countries and ecosystems. The spiritual and philosophical legacy of Samantha's life and death had continued to influence discussions about the relationship between humans and wild nature, the acceptable level of risk associated with wilderness recreation, and the responsibilities of individuals and society for protecting both human safety and wildlife conservation. These discussions had informed policy debates and had influenced management decisions throughout North America. Environmental philosophers and ethicists had used Samantha's case to explore questions about the intrinsic value of wilderness, the rights of wild animals to exist in natural environments, and the responsibilities of humans who choose to enter habitats where they are not the apex predators. These discussions had contributed to broader understanding of human-nature relationships in contemporary society. Samantha's death raises profound questions about how humans should relate to truly wild places where natural processes continue largely uncontrolled by human management, Dr. Davidson had written in her philosophical analysis of the incident. Her story illustrates both the transformative power of wilderness experiences and the genuine risks associated with entering ecosystems where humans are visitors rather than controllers of natural processes. The ongoing influence of Samantha's story on individual lives had been documented through thousands of testimonials from wilderness recreation participants who had modified their behavior, improved their preparation, or changed their career directions based on learning about her experience. These personal impacts had multiplied her influence far beyond what could be measured through formal programs or institutional changes. Reading about Samantha's life and death changed my entire approach to outdoor recreation and wildlife conservation, explained Dr. Maria Rodriguez, who had changed her graduate studies from anthropology to wildlife biology after learning about Samantha's case. Her passion for wildlife and her commitment to science-based conservation inspired me to pursue a career where I could contribute to preventing human-wildlife conflicts while protecting predator populations. Her influence continues through everyone whose life has been changed by her story. The comprehensive impact of Samantha's life and death had demonstrated how individual tragedy could contribute to broader improvements in safety, conservation, and education that benefited countless other people who shared her love for wilderness and wildlife. While her death represented an irreplaceable loss for her family and friends, her legacy had continued to grow and influence positive changes throughout the conservation and outdoor recreation communities. Samantha's story reminds us that individual lives matter and that personal tragedy can contribute to changes that prevent other families from experiencing similar losses. Her father, Michael, had reflected during the 15th anniversary memorial service. We miss her every day, but we find comfort in knowing that her life and death have contributed to protecting both people and wildlife in the places she loved so much. Her influence continues to grow through everyone who learns from her experience and commits to making wilderness recreation safer while preserving the wild character of these special places. October 31st, 2025, had begun as a perfect day for wilderness recreation and had ended as a tragic reminder that wild places remain genuinely dangerous environments where natural processes continue regardless of human presence or preparation. Samantha Larkin's death had demonstrated both the transformative power of wilderness experiences and the ultimate price that some individuals pay for their love of wild places and wildlife. Her legacy continued to influence positive changes in safety, conservation, and education that honored her memory, while protecting the wilderness and wildlife that had inspired her passion for the natural world. The next stories: The Weight of Wild Things. The morning mist clung to Katmai National Park like a shroud, and Dr. Sarah Chen found herself questioning every decision that had brought her to this moment. As a wildlife psychologist specializing in human-animal conflict, she had studied the psychological aftermath of bear encounters for over a decade, but she had never been the subject herself. Standing at the edge of the parking area with her research partner, Dr. Marcus Webb, and their guide, Tommy Nakamura, she felt the familiar weight of academic confidence warring with something more primal, the ancient fear that had kept humans alive for millennia. The psychological preparation is as important as the physical gear, she had written in her latest paper on wilderness trauma. Now, loading bear spray onto her belt, she wondered if her own psychological preparation was adequate. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to enter one of the most densely populated brown bear habitats in North America, carrying equipment to study the very trauma she was risking. Marcus adjusted his backpack straps, his movements betraying the nervous energy he was trying to suppress. At 38, he was younger than Sarah by 5 years, but his expertise in behavioral psychology had made him an invaluable research partner. "You know what's interesting?" he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when trying to intellectualize his anxiety. "We're experiencing anticipatory stress right now. Our cortisol levels are probably elevated. Our sympathetic nervous system is firing. We're essentially in a low-level fight or flight state before we've even encountered any danger. Tommy, their Alaskan native guide, had been listening to their academic chatter with the patient amusement of someone who lived with bears as neighbors. "Doc," he said, shouldering his own pack with practiced ease, "all that thinking is just noise. The bears don't care about your theories. They care about salmon, territory, and cubs. You respect that. You stay alert. You'll be fine." But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. She had interviewed dozens of survivors, had mapped the psychological terrain of bear encounters with the same precision that cartographers mapped mountains. She knew that the human mind, when confronted with a massive predator, could fracture in ways that took years to heal. Some survivors developed agoraphobia, unable to leave their homes. Others became obsessed with wilderness survival, as if accumulating knowledge could serve as armor against future encounters. A few developed a form of Stockholm syndrome with the wilderness itself, returning again and again to the places that had traumatized them, seeking resolution that might never come. The three of them began their hike into the Brooks Falls area, where they would spend the next week documenting bear behavior and conducting follow-up interviews with park rangers who had experienced encounters. The trail wound through dense alder thickets and across salmon streams, each turn offering the possibility of a surprise meeting with a 1,000-pound grizzly. Sarah found her mind cycling through the cognitive patterns she had identified in her research. Hypervigilance was setting in, her eyes scanning constantly for movement, her ears straining for sounds that might indicate danger. She could feel her body entering what she termed wilderness time, where minutes stretched into hours and every rustle of leaves demanded immediate threat assessment. "I'm already exhibiting the behavioral markers," she told Marcus as they paused at a stream crossing. "Heightened awareness, repetitive safety checking, narrative rehearsal of escape routes." "Narrative rehearsal?" Tommy asked, genuinely curious. "It's when your mind starts running scenarios," Marcus explained. "If a bear charges from the left, do I go right toward that tree? If it comes from upstream, is there enough time to deploy bear spray? The brain is essentially creating a library of potential responses." But Sarah knew that all the mental rehearsal in the world might crumble in the face of an actual encounter. She had interviewed Janet Morrison, a wilderness photographer who had survived a grizzly attack 3 years earlier. Janet described the moment of encounter as cognitive collapse. All her training, all her preparation, compressed into a single overwhelming moment of pure terror where rational thought became impossible. "I knew everything I was supposed to do," Janet had told her. "Make myself big, speak in a calm voice, back away slowly. But when I saw that bear rear up on its hind legs, when I realized it was bigger than my car, my mind just went white. Static, I couldn't access any of my training. I became an animal myself." As they continued deeper into bear country, Sarah began to understand the weight of vulnerability that came with being human in a landscape designed for creatures far more powerful than themselves. The psychological pressure was constant, not just fear of injury or death, but fear of helplessness, of being reduced to prey in an ecosystem where they were visitors at best, intruders at worst. By evening, they had reached their research site, a remote cabin that would serve as their base camp. The structure was solid but basic, with reinforced doors and windows designed to keep out curious bears. As they settled in for the night, Sarah found herself experiencing what she had termed fortress mentality in her research, the psychological need to create barriers, both physical and mental, against the wilderness. Tommy was cooking dinner on a camp stove, the smell of food requiring careful management in bear country. "You know what I notice about people when they first come up here?" he said, stirring a pot of chili. "They think the danger is sudden. Like in the movies, bear jumps out, attacks, it's over. But the real psychological pressure is the knowing. knowing that every time you step outside, every time you turn a corner, you might meet something that can kill you without even trying hard. Marcus nodded, making notes in his research journal. Chronic stress response. The body can't distinguish between immediate danger and potential danger, so you're flooded with stress hormones for days or weeks at a time. But Sarah was thinking about something deeper. She had begun to suspect that bear encounters were really about confronting the illusion of human dominance over nature. In cities, in suburbs, even in most wilderness areas, humans maintained the psychological fiction that they were in control. Bears, particularly the massive brown bears of Alaska, shattered that fiction completely. That night, lying in her sleeping bag, Sarah listened to the sounds of the wilderness around their cabin. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush sent her nervous system into alert mode. She found herself creating mental maps of the cabin's interior, calculating distances to exits, rehearsing scenarios. Her mind was doing exactly what she had observed in her research subjects, trying to create the illusion of control in an uncontrollable situation. She thought about David Kowalski, a hunter she had interviewed who had survived a mauling near Yellowstone. David had described the weeks following his encounter as living in a world made of glass. Everything felt fragile, temporary, as if the thin veneer of safety that allowed humans to function could be shattered at any moment. He had developed severe anxiety, not just about bears, but about driving cars, flying in airplanes, even walking downstairs. The bear encounter had awakened a generalized awareness of mortality that colored every aspect of his existence. The second day brought their first close encounter. They were observing bears fishing at a salmon run when a massive male grizzly emerged from the tree line less than 50 yards away. The bear paused, testing the air with his nose, his small eyes fixed on their small research group. Sarah felt her body's response before her mind could process it. Her heart rate spiked immediately, adrenaline flooding her system with such intensity that her vision seemed to narrow and sharpen simultaneously. Time took on that elastic quality she had heard so many survivors describe, seconds stretching into minutes, her awareness becoming crystal clear and tunnel-focused at the same time. The bear was enormous, his shoulder hump indicating this was a mature male, possibly weighing close to 800 pounds. His fur was dark brown, almost black, with silver tips that caught the morning light. He moved with deceptive ease, his massive frame covering ground with fluid efficiency that made Sarah acutely aware of how slowly humans moved in comparison. Tommy had frozen in place, his hand moving slowly toward his bear spray. "Nobody move," he whispered. "He's just checking us out." But Sarah's mind was racing through everything she knew about bear psychology. This wasn't aggression, not yet. The bear's ears were forward, alert, but not pinned back. His mouth was closed, not displaying teeth. He was in information-gathering mode, trying to categorize these strange creatures that smelled like humans, but were standing still like prey. The psychological tension of those 30 seconds was more intense than anything Sarah had experienced in her professional life. She could feel her nervous system cycling between freeze and flight responses, her body preparing for action while her rational mind counseled stillness. It was like being trapped between two incompatible survival strategies, the ancient mammalian instinct to run and the newer human knowledge that running might trigger a chase response. The bear eventually dismissed them as non-threatening and wandered off toward the salmon run, but the encounter left all three researchers shaken. Sarah found herself experiencing what she had identified in her studies as hypervigilance rebound, an exhausting state where the nervous system remained on high alert long after the danger had passed. "That's what gets people," Tommy said as they watched the bear disappear into the willows. "Not the attack itself, but carrying that feeling around afterward, like you're always waiting for the next one." Over the following days, Sarah began to understand bear encounters as fundamentally psychological events. that happened to unfold in physical space. The real trauma wasn't necessarily the injury, though that was certainly significant, but the shattering of assumptions about human place in the natural world. She interviewed park ranger Lisa Chen, no relation, who had survived a defensive attack 2 years earlier while clearing a trail. Lisa described the encounter as educational in the worst possible way. "I learned things about myself I never wanted to know," Lisa had explained. "I learned that all my training, all my confidence, all my experience could disappear in about 3 seconds. I learned that I could make sounds I didn't know humans could make. I learned what it felt like to be completely helpless while still being conscious and aware." The psychological aftermath for Lisa had been complex. She developed what therapists called environmental anxiety, a constant awareness of potential danger in natural settings, but more unsettling was what she described as species dysphoria, a disturbing awareness of human fragility that made her feel disconnected from her own body. "I kept thinking about how soft we are," Lisa had told Sarah. "How thin our skin is, how easily we break. I would look at other people and think, don't you realize how vulnerable you are? Don't you understand that we're just meat walking around in a world full of things that can tear us apart?" The psychological concept that emerged from Sarah's research was something she termed apex awareness. The sudden, visceral understanding that humans, despite their technology and intelligence, remained prey animals in many ecological contexts. This awareness, once triggered, seemed to fundamentally alter people's relationship with both nature and civilization. On their 4th day in the field, they witnessed an actual attack from a distance. A photographer had approached too close to a sow with cubs, and the mother bear had charged to defend her offspring. The encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. The bear knocked the man down, delivered what appeared to be a warning bite to his leg, and then retreated with her cubs. Sarah watched through binoculars as the man went through the classic post-encounter psychological sequence she had documented. First came shock, a period of dissociation where the victim seemed unable to fully comprehend what had happened. Then came the fear response, trembling, hyperventilation, the body's attempt to process the massive adrenaline dump. Finally came what she termed reality reconstruction, the mind's desperate attempt to make sense of an experience that challenged fundamental assumptions about safety and control. The rescue and medical response provided another window into the psychological dimensions of bear encounters. The helicopter evacuation, the EMTs working to stabilize the victim, the careful coordination of emergency services, all of it served to reinforce the seriousness of what had occurred while simultaneously providing a reassuring display of human competence and technological capability. But Sarah had learned from her research that these displays of human mastery often created their own psychological complications. Survivors frequently developed a complex relationship with technology and civilization, simultaneously grateful for human achievements and newly aware of their limitations. Many described feeling like they existed in 2 worlds, the civilized world where humans were dominant and the natural world where they remained vulnerable prey. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating wilderness trauma, had explained to Sarah that bear encounters often triggered what she called existential realignment. "These patients have to rebuild their entire worldview," Dr. Williams had said. "They've had a direct, visceral experience of human vulnerability that most people never face. They've looked death in the face and realized how thin the margin is between life and death, between safety and catastrophe. That knowledge changes everything." The psychological treatment for bear encounter trauma was complex because it involved both specific phobias and broader existential challenges. Cognitive behavioral therapy could help with the immediate fear responses. But the deeper philosophical questions about human place in nature, about the illusion of control, about mortality itself, required longer-term therapeutic work. Some survivors, Dr. Williams explained, developed what researchers called wilderness syndrome, a form of PTSD specifically related to natural environments. These individuals might experience panic attacks triggered by the sound of wind in trees, by shadows moving in their peripheral vision, or by any situation where they felt exposed and vulnerable. Others developed what seemed like the opposite response, an obsessive need to return to wilderness areas, as if they were trying to master their fear through repeated exposure. These individuals often became wilderness guides, search and rescue volunteers, or wildlife researchers, channeling their trauma into expertise. But perhaps the most complex psychological response Sarah had documented was what she called predator identification. Some survivors seemed to internalize aspects of bear psychology, becoming hyper-aware of territorial boundaries, developing unusually acute senses of hearing and smell, and displaying protective behaviors that seemed more appropriate to wild animals than to humans. James Patterson, a backpacker who had survived a night-long standoff with a persistent grizzly, had described this psychological shift in vivid terms. "I started thinking like a bear," he had told Sarah. "I became obsessed with scent control, with understanding wind patterns, with recognizing territorial markers. I would enter a room and immediately identify all the exits, all the potential weapons, all the hiding places. My wife said I moved differently, like I was always ready to fight or run." This psychological adaptation made evolutionary sense. Humans who survived predator encounters probably did develop enhanced threat detection abilities. But in modern civilization, these adaptations often became problematic, creating individuals who were hypervigilant in environments where such vigilance was unnecessary and exhausting. On their final day in the field, Sarah experienced her own moment of predator identification. She was collecting water samples from a stream when she became aware of being watched. Every instinct screamed danger, though she could see no obvious threat. She found herself moving with careful, deliberate steps, her body positioned to allow quick escape, her senses stretched to maximum sensitivity. A massive brown bear emerged from the willows not 20 feet away, watching her with patient curiosity. Sarah felt her consciousness split, part of her mind cataloguing the bear's body language, assessing threat levels, calculating escape routes, while another part marveled at the psychological transformation she was experiencing in real time. The bear was clearly not aggressive. His posture was relaxed, his facial expression neutral. He seemed simply curious about this strange creature collecting water from his territory. But Sarah's nervous system was in full alert mode, every sense heightened, every muscle prepared for action. What struck her most was the quality of communication happening between them. Without words, without conscious thought, they were engaged in a complex negotiation about space, territory, and intentions. She understood on a level deeper than language that she was being evaluated, tested, judged. The bear was determining whether she represented a threat, a source of food, or simply a curiosity to be ignored. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the bear turned and walked away, dismissing her as uninteresting. But Sarah remained in the hyper-alert state for nearly an hour afterward, her body unwilling to believe that the danger had passed. That evening, as they prepared to leave bear country, Sarah found herself changed by the experience. She had not been attacked, had not been injured, had barely even been threatened, but she had been profoundly transformed by the psychological experience of existing as prey in a predator's territory. The drive back to Anchorage provided time for reflection on what she had learned. The psychological impact of bear encounters, she realized, extended far beyond the individuals who experienced them directly. Families, friends, entire communities could be affected by the knowledge that such encounters were possible. She thought about the families of attack survivors she had interviewed and how they struggled with their own secondary trauma. Spouses who became overprotective, children who developed their own wilderness phobias, parents who blamed themselves for allowing loved ones to enter dangerous territory. The broader community response was equally complex. Towns near bear habitats often developed elaborate psychological defense mechanisms, detailed protocols for bear encounters, community education programs, sophisticated early warning systems. These measures provided practical safety benefits, but they also served important psychological functions, creating the illusion of control and preparedness in the face of an essentially uncontrollable natural force. Media coverage of bear attacks created another layer of psychological complexity. Sensationalized reporting often portrayed bears as monsters and wilderness as inherently dangerous, reinforcing urban fears about natural environments. But this coverage also served a psychological function for people who would never encounter a bear. It allowed them to experience danger vicariously while remaining safely removed from actual risk. Sarah had studied the psychological phenomenon of disaster fascination, the human tendency to be simultaneously repelled and attracted by accounts of survival and trauma. Bear attack stories combined several psychologically compelling elements: the confrontation with mortality, the test of human courage and resourcefulness, and the reminder of humanity's vulnerable place in the natural world. Back in her hotel room in Anchorage, Sarah began drafting her research notes. The psychological impact of dangerous wildlife encounters, she wrote, could not be understood simply as individual trauma responses. These encounters challenged fundamental assumptions about human dominance, control, and safety that underpinned modern civilization. The most psychologically devastating aspect of bear encounters might not be the physical danger, but the knowledge they provided about the fragility of human confidence. Every person who heard about such encounters was forced to confront, however briefly, their own vulnerability in a world that they had been trained to believe was under human control. She thought about her conversation with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an emergency room physician who had treated numerous bear attack victims. Dr. Walsh had described the psychological challenge of providing medical care in such cases. The physical injuries are often manageable, Dr. Walsh had explained. Modern trauma surgery can repair a lot of damage, but the psychological wounds are much more complex. These patients have seen something that most humans never see, their own complete helplessness in the face of natural forces. They've learned that all their assumptions about safety and control were illusions. The medical response to bear attacks, Dr. Walsh explained, had evolved to address both physical and psychological trauma. Emergency protocols now included immediate psychological support, recognition that survivors would need long-term mental health care, and understanding that family members would also require therapeutic intervention. But perhaps most importantly, medical professionals had learned to recognize their own psychological responses to treating bear attack victims. Healthcare workers often experienced vicarious trauma, suddenly aware of their own vulnerability and mortality through their patients' experiences. Sarah's research had identified several distinct phases in the psychological recovery from bear encounters. The acute phase, lasting days to weeks, was characterized by shock, hypervigilance, and anxiety. Survivors often experienced nightmares, flashbacks, and severe startle responses during this period. The integration phase, lasting weeks to months, involved the gradual incorporation of the trauma into the survivor's worldview. This was often the most difficult period, as individuals struggled to reconcile their pre-encounter assumptions about safety with their new awareness of vulnerability. The adaptation phase, which could last years or even decades, involved the development of new psychological frameworks for understanding risk, safety, and human place in nature. Some survivors emerged from this phase with wisdom and resilience that enriched their lives. Others remained trapped in cycles of anxiety and avoidance that limited their functioning. A smaller percentage of survivors experienced what Sarah termed transformational growth, a fundamental positive restructuring of their relationship with life, death, and nature. These individuals often described their bear encounter as terrifying, but ultimately meaningful, providing them with perspectives on mortality and resilience that they wouldn't trade despite the trauma involved. Maria Santos, a biologist who had survived a grisly mauling while conducting field research, exemplified this transformational growth. "The bear taught me things about life that I couldn't have learned any other way," Maria had told Sarah. "I learned that I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I believed. I learned that nature isn't cruel or kind, it just is. And I learned that humans are part of something much larger and more powerful than ourselves." But Maria's transformation hadn't been simple or easy. She had endured months of physical rehabilitation, years of therapy, and ongoing challenges with anxiety and hypervigilance. The wisdom she had gained came at an enormous cost, and she was careful to never romanticize the trauma itself. The psychological impact of bear encounters also extended into relationship dynamics in complex ways. Some couples grew closer through the shared experience of survival and recovery. Others were torn apart by differences in how they processed the trauma, or by the changes in personality and worldview that often followed such encounters. Sarah had interviewed couples where one partner had been attacked while the other watched helplessly. The psychological burden of witnessing a loved one's trauma, combined with guilt about being unable to prevent it, often created its own form of lasting trauma. Children of bear attack survivors faced particular psychological challenges. They had to process not only their parents' physical injuries, but also the existential questions raised by the encounter. Many developed their own anxieties about wilderness activities, while others seemed to inherit their parents' hypervigilance and threat detection behaviors. The legal and insurance systems that surrounded bear attacks created additional psychological pressures for survivors. The need to document injuries, prove circumstances, and navigate complex liability questions often forced survivors to relive their trauma repeatedly during the most vulnerable phases of their recovery. Park services and wilderness management agencies had developed increasingly sophisticated protocols for supporting bear encounter survivors, recognizing that their psychological needs were as important as their medical needs. This support included immediate crisis counseling, long-term therapy referrals, and assistance navigating the complex aftermath of such encounters. But perhaps most importantly, these agencies had learned to address the psychological needs of their own staff. Rangers, guides, and emergency responders who dealt with bear encounters faced their own risks of vicarious trauma and burnout. Support programs now recognized that anyone who worked in bear country was psychologically impacted by the knowledge of potential danger. Tommy, their guide, had shared his own perspective on the psychological weight of working in bear habitat. "You develop a different relationship with fear," he had explained. "Not fearless, that would be stupid and dangerous, but you learn to carry the fear without being paralyzed by it. You learn to respect the danger without being consumed by it." This psychological adaptation, learning to function effectively while maintaining appropriate caution, was perhaps the healthiest response to bear country living. It required a delicate balance between awareness and anxiety, between preparation and paranoia. Sarah's research suggested that the key to psychological resilience in bear encounters lay not in eliminating fear, but in developing a functional relationship with it. Survivors who recovered most successfully were those who learned to view their fear as information rather than as something to be avoided or overcome. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a wilderness therapy specialist, had developed treatment approaches specifically for bear encounter trauma. His methods focused on helping survivors understand their psychological responses as normal and adaptive rather than pathological. Fear of predators is one of our most ancient and important survival mechanisms, Dr. Rodriguez had explained to Sarah. The problem isn't the fear itself, it's when the fear becomes generalized or chronic in ways that interfere with normal functioning. Treatment involves helping people calibrate their threat detection systems so they can function in both wilderness and civilized environments. This calibration process often involved gradually re-engaging with natural environments under controlled conditions, learning to distinguish between realistic and unrealistic threats, and developing confidence in one's ability to respond appropriately to danger. But Dr. Rodriguez emphasized that full psychological recovery from bear encounters might not involve returning to pre-encounter functioning. These experiences change people permanently, he said. The goal isn't to forget what happened or to eliminate all anxiety about bears. The goal is to integrate the experience in ways that allow for full, rich living while maintaining appropriate caution. As Sarah prepared to leave Alaska, she reflected on how her own brief exposure to bear country had changed her understanding of her research. The academic frameworks she had developed for understanding wilderness trauma had been essential for organizing and analyzing data, but they hadn't fully captured the visceral, transformational nature of actually existing as prey in a predator's territory. She realized that her research would need to evolve to include more phenomenological approaches, methods that captured the lived experience of bear encounters rather than just their measurable psychological effects. The most important insights might come from deep, qualitative interviews with survivors rather than from standardized psychological assessments. The flight back to her university in Colorado provided time for Sarah to process her own psychological responses to the week in bear country. She noticed that her threat detection systems remained heightened even in the controlled environment of the airplane. Sounds that would normally be ignored, the shifting of other passengers, the changing pitch of the engines, triggered brief alertness responses. More unsettling was her newfound awareness of human vulnerability in all environments. Looking at her fellow passengers, she found herself thinking about how soft and defenseless they appeared, how little protection their clothing and technology actually provided against natural forces. This was the psychological cost of apex awareness. Once you fully understood human vulnerability, it was impossible to return to the comfortable illusions of safety and control that allowed most people to function without constant anxiety. But Sarah also recognized potential benefits in this new awareness. Her experience in bear country had connected her to evolutionary heritage in ways that felt both frightening and enriching. She had accessed psychological resources, heightened senses, rapid threat assessment, intense present-moment awareness that were normally dormant in civilized environments. The challenge would be integrating these insights into her daily life without becoming paralyzed by awareness of danger. Like the survivors she studied, she would need to find ways to carry the knowledge gained from bear encounters without being overwhelmed by it. Her research had convinced her that bear encounters served an important psychological function in modern society. They provided direct experience of mortality and vulnerability that was largely absent from civilized life. While traumatic, these encounters could also be profoundly educational, teaching lessons about resilience, adaptation, and human place in the natural world that couldn't be learned any other way. The psychological impact of dangerous wildlife encounters, Sarah concluded, extended far beyond individual trauma responses. These experiences challenged fundamental cultural assumptions about human dominance and safety that underpinned modern civilization. They forced individuals and communities to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability and mortality that were usually successfully avoided. But they also provided opportunities for growth, wisdom, and connection to natural processes that had shaped human evolution for millions of years. The key was learning to integrate these experiences in ways that enhanced rather than diminished human functioning and well-being. Back at her university, Sarah began developing new research protocols that would capture both the traumatic and transformational aspects of bear encounters. She planned to focus more heavily on the phenomenological dimensions of these experiences, the moment-by-moment consciousness of existing as prey, the psychological negotiation that occurred between humans and bears, and the lasting changes in worldview that often followed such encounters. She also began developing therapeutic approaches specifically designed for wilderness trauma, drawing on her own brief experience of apex awareness to inform treatment methods. The goal would be helping survivors integrate their experiences in ways that honored both the trauma and the wisdom that such encounters could provide. Her work had convinced her that bear encounters represented a unique category of psychological experience that deserved specialized attention from mental health professionals. These weren't simply cases of PTSD or specific phobias. They were profound challenges to fundamental assumptions about human nature and human place in the world. The survivors she had interviewed were pioneers in a sense, forced to navigate psychological territory that most humans never experienced. Their struggles and insights could provide valuable guidance for anyone seeking to develop a more realistic and resilient relationship with natural forces. As Sarah settled back into her university routine, she carried with her a new understanding of the weight of wild things, not just their physical power, but their psychological impact on humans who encountered them. Bear encounters, she realized, were fundamentally educational experiences that taught lessons about vulnerability, resilience, and mortality that couldn't be learned in any other way. The psychological impact of these encounters would continue to ripple outward through survivors, their families, their communities, and even researchers like herself who studied them from a distance. Each encounter added to the collective human understanding of what it meant to exist as both predator and prey in a world where the boundaries between civilization and wilderness were never as clear as they appeared. Her research would continue, but now it would be informed by her own brief experience of existing in bear country, of feeling the weight of apex awareness, of understanding viscerally what her interview subjects had been trying to communicate through their accounts of encounters with forces larger, stronger, and more dangerous than themselves. The psychological landscape of bear encounters was vast and complex, involving individual trauma, family dynamics, community responses, cultural assumptions, and fundamental questions about human nature itself. Sarah's work was just beginning to map this territory, but she now understood that the journey would require not just academic rigor, but also personal courage. The willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability and mortality that bear encounters forced into consciousness. The weight of wild things, she realized, was not just about the physical mass of 800-pound predators. It was about the psychological mass of knowledge that humans gained when they encountered these creatures, knowledge about their own nature, their place in the ecosystem, and the thin margins that separated safety from catastrophe in the natural world. This knowledge, once gained, could never be completely set aside. It became part of the psychological landscape, shaping responses to danger, relationships with nature, and fundamental assumptions about life itself. Sarah's research had shown her that bear encounters were among the most psychologically significant experiences that modern humans could have. They stripped away the comfortable illusions of civilization and forced direct confrontation with evolutionary heritage, mortality, and the awesome power of natural forces. The survivors she studied were forever changed by these encounters, but many also reported that they wouldn't trade the wisdom gained despite the trauma endured. Understanding the psychological impact of dangerous wildlife encounters was crucial, not just for treating trauma survivors, but for helping all humans develop more realistic and resilient relationships with the natural world. In an era of climate change and increasing human encroachment into wildlife habitat, such encounters were likely to become more frequent, making psychological understanding and preparation increasingly important. The weight of wild things would continue to shape human psychology as long as people ventured into landscapes where they were not the dominant species. Sarah's work was contributing to a growing understanding of how these encounters affected human consciousness, but she knew that the full psychological impact would take decades more research to fully comprehend. What she did know was that bear encounters represented a unique window into human psychology under extreme stress, providing insights into resilience, adaptation, and the complex relationships between fear, wisdom, and survival. The survivors she studied were teachers in the deepest sense, sharing hard-won knowledge about what it meant to be human in a world that was still, despite all appearances, fundamentally wild.